Hello Guild Wars 2 gamers, today is Monday, December 15th. You might be seeing this on the following day, and today we got a little bit of Guild Wars 2 news. There is a Guild Wars 2 live stream that happened earlier today when I was doing life stuff, you know, super boring things, where they did a stream where they talked about the balance patch coming in January and what it will entail. We are going to watch a slightly sped up version of this. I will be doing a TLDR. So if you just want to see the TLDR or my best attempt at a TLDR, there will be a timestamp near the end of this video. Go to that. I will also include the link to all my sources in the description and in a pinned comment under the video. So there's a forum post, there is a wiki post, and there is this video that we're about to watch. I'll include all of these down below. For the people who enjoy the long form content, let's dive right into it and start watching this and seeing how they are going to break all our classes. So first of all, looks like I'm okay in the bottom left right now.
Everybody, to another episode of Where Have Their Eyebrows Gone? My name is...
Does he ever... Alright, I'm trying to figure out if it's me or him.
Is Roy Marks. I'm going to
Hang on.
Are we feeling that...
Okay, if I skip ahead... I can hear both. Alright, hopefully they fix that.
Now coming through both sound channels, left and right. Chat, feel free to let me know if that is not correct. Yes, and of course we are also joined by Taylor Trigg Brooks, another skills and balance designer. Taylor, how are you doing today?
Hello, doing pretty good. Yeah, as Cal mentioned, we have a...
I am really glad I didn't turn up the volume yet for Roy. Because Taylor is way louder than Roy.
A smaller update, but, you know, these changes should be, you know, more impactful than just number changes. A lot of them are, like, small reworks or adjustments to how things function, so excited to get into it.
You might have the spiciest single change in... What time frame do you want to put on this, Taylor? Because I'm trying to think how far back we can go.
Spiciest single change.
Spiciest change.
They're doubling ranger numbers.
Recent memory, pretty easily say that. Maybe almost a decade. As far as how sweet
Wow, that's ambitious. I don't think I remember every patch.
Oh man, okay, hold on. I haven't seen it. No one spoiled me on this. The spiciest single change in a decade. They're deleting quickness and alacrity. That's my prediction.
For the last 10 years, so...
Taylor's got a big brain.
Someone go look this up after the stream and see if Taylor is right.
Yeah. All right. But I think we can probably start getting into the patch notes itself. Feel free to keep mentioning the audio stuff. I have changed the settings around a little bit, so hopefully it'll sound a little better. I've boosted my volume a little bit, but feel free to let me know if it still is too quiet. But yes, we can get right into it. And yeah, here we go.
All right, real quick. I am aware that Roy is pretty quiet right now, but Taylor is very loud, and I don't want to like turn the volume up because of him, and then we get knocked out of our chair as soon as he unexpectedly talks. So we're gonna deal with it.
So moving on to the actual notes, we're gonna be starting off with a general note.
Yeah.
Oh.
I guess the last thing I forgot to say is, as always, we will be posting the preview notes after the stream. So if you miss something, that's totally fine. It'll be on the forums.
Link is down below.
And also, good to mention that we are only streaming on Twitch right now, but we will be uploading a VOD of this stream to YouTube in the future. Yes, as always, go check out the forums after the stream. We'll have those posted there. Go give us feedback, yada yada. We'll do that at the end of the stream as well. Yes. All right. Starting off here, we've got a little bit of a general note. This is obviously just a game-wide change, not specific to any class. Taylor, if you want to talk about this a little bit.
Yeah, so this is kind of like, not really... Most people...
Is closed captions an option? Not at the moment. I don't think so. Not available for this content. No, because they have not put this on YouTube yet, so I'm having to watch it on Twitch, and Twitch doesn't have the captions in there by default.
I don't even know this, but defiance damage, when you deal to a breakbar enemy in PvE, if it's below 1 second of crowd control, it'll round up to 1 second. This was done a long time ago because of skills like Headshot on Thief before competitive splits existed, where it was important that they had a small CC duration but wanted them to be useful. But now in the game, you know, most things that we want to deal proper defiance damage are over this. So this is kind of a prelude to what we're going to be talking about when we get to Chronomancer. The biggest skill this affects is time sync, which is a half-second daze, which is rounded up to a second for all of them. So you get a lot more CC out of that skill than you should. So this is just a small change. We'll talk about it more when we get to Chronomancer. But yeah.
Cool. All right. And we are going to be going in mostly alphabetical order. We might have a couple swaps here or there, depending on, you know, certain things. But first off, first class we'll be starting with is Elementalist. And Cal,
mostly alphabetical.
Yeah, mostly alphabetical. Cal, please take it away.
Yeah, so we have a few different...
All right, so more people are complaining about the volume. I've got the player on maximum right now. Hang on. Can I... What do we got here? Okay, we're... This is gonna like mess other stuff up too.
Different things going on for LE. These are a couple of the core LE kind of mini reworks that we have going on. We'll also have some updates to Weaver and a fun little rework to the Catalyst, one of the Catalyst traits at the end here. But kicking things off, we see these are a few skills and traits that are a bit underused. We see Ether Renewal. You know, we've reduced the cast time of this skill so many times over the years, and it's still not quite where we want it to be, and rather than reduce the cast time even more, we decided to put a little bit more value on top of the skill because it's definitely something that...
Okay, so timeout. So Ether Renewal now recovers endurance each pulse. Yo, huge buff for Ellies. Rejoice. Inscription trait no longer grants resistance when using a glyph and instead grants resistance when attuning to air. The resistance duration is decreased when fresh air trait is also equipped. Bountiful Power has been reworked. Gain charges when switching attunements. At 5 charges, gain quickness and increase strike damage for a duration.
Can cover with stability or maybe cover with like an arcane shield. We want it to be more of that high risk, high reward type of skill. So now on top of the heal and the cleanse, you're also going to be getting some endurance back every pulse. It'll amount to about a full dodge, maybe a little bit less because the number of pulses is not perfectly a divisible number into 50, but it will be a pretty good amount of endurance. So now if you do maybe play with Rock Solid or other stability sources, or have someone give you stability, or have Arcane Shield to cover your Ether Renewal, or you just find a good opportunity to get that channel off, it will be a pretty powerful skill, and we're hoping that this does, you know, see a little bit of play on maybe a couple builds here and there. Inscription, this is the glyph trait. You know, it gives boons when you use a glyph, and it previously given resistance on every glyph, but we've seen a little bit of difficulty with actually utilizing this trait because some of the glyphs have longer cast or longer cooldowns. They're not really conducive to those on skill type do something triggers. You know, some of the ones are shorter cooldown, but it's harder to utilize with some of the longer cooldown glyphs. So we've kind of split that functionality out. You'll still have the boon on glyph trigger, which is going to be based off your attunement. Then the resistance component of this trait is going to be coming when you swap to air. Notably, if you do have fresh air equipped, this will be a lower duration, basically how we handled one with air to prevent it from being too powerful, but this will give you a nice little, 3 seconds of resistance as you enter air attunement if you play Inscription. So it does hopefully make it a more competitive option alongside the other air traits, and it gives you a little bit more of that resistance availability as opposed to being super reliant on glyphs to get that. And we have a nice little rework to Bountiful Power. This is a trait that is, you know, it's a damage bonus, but it's a little on the less interesting side, and this is something that we try to avoid with Grandmaster traits these days. And as we look at traits to rework in Grandmaster traits especially, we want these to be definitely the most exciting traits in the trait line. You know, we have Evasive Arcana in the same slot. We have the Arcane trait, which has got a nice little rework in the past year or so. I forget exactly when that change happened, but fun change for Arcane builds. So Bountiful Power, trying to get a little bit more flavor into this trait as well. It's still going to be a damage bonus, but it is going to function kind of like Kinetic Battery does on Engineer, where you're going to be building up these charges. The charges here will come from switching attunements, and then once you hit that 5 charge threshold, you'll get a burst of quickness and a burst of strike damage for a duration. So it gives you an opportunity to kind of set up your fire burst, set up your air burst, just a bit more of a controlled moment, and a lot more powerful in modes where you don't have, you know, super high.
And looking at the notes, Bountiful Power change looks like it's in all game modes.
Moving on, a lot of Weaver changes here.
Yeah, so these are 6 changes. These are the dual skills for Land Spear for Weaver. We've seen a lot of feedback around these since they got introduced in the game, where they are a bit more on the simplistic side, and we were really leaning on the idea of the mechanic that allows you to kind of bypass the Weaver cooldown by getting to your dual attune state a little bit faster, which theoretically played nicely with the spear mechanics, but those skills ended up being a little bit low impact, so we wanted to take a second look at those, and this is kind of that second look where now they're going to behave. They're still going to have that same functionality that they do right now, but on top of that, they're going to give you a buff, kind of like a single-hit Venom, essentially, which is similar to kind of the other mechanics of the 3 skills, which will augment your next 3 skills, or your next spear skill. These will just affect your next strike of any kind, just to keep it a little bit simpler, but it will create essentially an AoE strike around the next target that you strike. And you see a number of different effects here, whether it's applying some conditions. Some of them will just be damage. You know, the Fire Air one is going to be the highest damage, but it's not going to inflict any conditions. Water Earth, we're going to see a little bit lower damage, but that's also going to heal you. We see a little bit of self-Conti removal in here as well. So a nice little spread of different effects, but they all will have that kind of extra AoE strike as well, which notably will trigger the Weaver trait that cares about striking someone with a dual attack, which previously these skills could not trigger at all.
Cool.
So we're hoping that, you know, this is... Spear is pretty much that AoE weapon already, so adding a little bit more AoE to that really fleshes out its identity and, you know, makes the Weaver kit a little bit more exciting for this weapon.
Indeed. And some Weaver changes continued on the next slide, but obviously feel free to drink some water. Stay hydrated, everybody.
Pyrovortex increased the burning on the initial strike from 1 stack for 2 seconds to 2 stacks for 6 seconds in PvP and World v World. Reduce the burning from the pulsing strikes from 2 seconds to 1 in PvP and World v World. Shearing Edge, increased number of bleed. Natural Frenzy, reduce the cooldown. Riptide, reduce the cooldown. Twist of Fate, increase super speed duration. Okay.
Yes, definitely hydrate. So a lot of these are a little bit more competitive focused. Weaver's something, especially like Condi Weaver is kind of the focus with these changes. It's something that we haven't seen a whole lot recently, and part of that is because it's just seen a lot of nerfs over the years because a lot of the ways that Condi Weaver especially deals its damage is a little bit unhealthy, kind of the way that it happens. You know, Primordial Stance, just pulsing burning is a big, kind of a big problem. Obviously, you get a little bit of that from the Lava Skin as well. What we're trying to do here is put a little bit more oomph, a little bit more power into like specific moments, as opposed to like those pulsing effects that just feel like they happen and there's not really counterplay to them. So the big one is here with Pyro Vortex. It's going to be doing an extra amount of burning on that initial strike. So previously this was so reliant on landing a CC and then getting like the full value of all the ticks of the Pyro Vortex. There's still going to be value in locking someone in those extra ticks, but we see that a lot of the damage is being shuffled into the initial strike. So as long as you're landing that, or as long as you're dodging that on either side, that's going to be more of the moment of power of this skill. So we see something like that. You know, Twin Strike is a big chunk of burning on it. Shearing Edge, we're kind of buffing up the damage a little bit there. Natural Frenzy, making it a little bit more accessible. These are kind of the main big moment, big damage skills that we're expecting and we're hoping are like kind of what allows Condi Weaver to do their damage. And again, becoming a little bit less reliant on stuff like Primordial Stance, which is not a mechanic that we're super happy with. Maybe it's something that we look at reworking in the future, but that's something that we'll think about a little bit further down the road. Also, Riptide, kind of getting a nice little 3 seconds off the recharge. We did this with the Earth skill as well. Earth and Vortex brought it back down from 18 to 15. Just a slight defensive addition to Weaver because, you know, we are hoping to see a little bit more of this, and we felt that 3 seconds, not going to make or break. We'll probably never see this skill at 12 seconds again, but we'll try it at 15 and see what happens.
So obviously, with these changes being mostly competitive focused, the bigger changes on the previous slide were of course game wide. But you know, are we feeling that Weaver is kind of just not really in a good place in competitive modes right now, or are these changes kind of aimed to bring it into a certain role or strengthen a specific role in those modes?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, Condi Weaver is something that hasn't been like super relevant for a while, and it is kind of one of the most natural builds. Probably like one of the more original builds that came to play with Weaver as a profession, as an elite spec. You know, Power Weaver of different flavors, especially Lightning Rod, is something that we have seen a little bit as well. But I think Condi Weaver is the one that probably needs a bit more help at the moment. So that's kind of where these changes are focused.
Very cool.
I can't speak for World v World, but I've done probably like 15 hours of PvP in the last week because I was just really into it recently, and I don't think I saw a single Weaver. Maybe one, maybe. And the main thing in PvP with Weaver is like 90% of them, you can just pop them like a balloon. The other 10% are like unkillable demigods because they are able to take advantage of the massive skill ceiling this class has. But yeah, I don't know what these changes are going to do to it, but the main issue with the class is just fundamentally it has a colossal amount of buttons. And if you don't know how to take advantage of those, you suck. And if you can take advantage of those, no one else can keep up with you, it feels like. So I'm not exactly sure what this is going to do because I don't really know how they're doing right now because I haven't seen any recently.
All right, that is going to wrap up the Ellie slides for us for now.
That's not actually.
That is not going to wrap up the Ellie slides for us. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm actually just forgetting. I'm joking. It's a trick. We have one more.
We do have one last trait here.
Actually, the most exciting.
All right. Catalyst, Staunch Aura's trait has been reworked and renamed Elemental Synergy. Gain an additional bonus when finishing a combo based on current attunement. This bonus can trigger once per attunement per interval. Per attunement. Per interval. What's the interval? Fire gain might, water heal yourself, air gain endurance, earth gain stability.
It's a fun little change. So Staunch Auras, this is the trait that obviously gave stability when you apply an aura to yourself. Very powerful in competitive modes. It's something that we've nerfed a lot in competitive modes. Just the like critical mass of auras that are available to Ellie, but also just Catalyst especially, made it like really difficult to find the right balance for this trait. You either have like way too much stability or not enough stability based off the number. And just the raw like quantity of stability sources that you always have to play around is like really something that's really hard to get right. So as we're looking for like fun, exciting reworks to do, we really want to do kind of like a combo focused Grandmaster trait because Catalyst very much is like the most combo focused of the elite specs. We already have the trait that says gain an aura when you finish a combo. Obviously you have a combo field available pretty much all the time, so having the combo Grandmaster trait kind of felt very natural, and it also gave us a way to make this stability a little bit more controlled. So we do see that you still get stability here. The way this trait works is Whenever you finish a combo, you'll get a little bonus effect based off your attunement. This will be a once per 10-second interval, exactly how the aura trait works on the Grandmaster Minor.
10-second interval.
So when you're in fire, you'll get extra might stacks. When you're in water, you'll get a little bit of healing. Air, you'll gain some endurance back. And earth, there's that stability again. So it's a little bit more of a controlled trigger. It's something that we can put a little bit more duration on and feel a little bit more confident that this isn't going to cause a ton of problems, but it will still give you access to that stability fairly regularly as long as you're able to combo well in earth attunement.
All right. Now that'll wrap up Ellie. And I may not be able to count, but I do know my ABCs, and so that does tell me that Engineer is going to be next. And with Engineer, we're going to have Taylor talk about that.
Okay.
Class. So we got going on here.
Yep.
Even though I think the first note is something that Cal is super excited about personally, but...
Yeah, for Engineer, we have some super small changes on this page, and then later we'll get into some trait reworks. I think we're talking about firearms, some specialization, wide changes there, and then also touching some Grandmasters on alchemy and tools. But for these couple, the first are just kind of quality of life changes. Box of Nails, right now it immobilizes when you use it on someone that is crowd controlled. That wasn't really a great trigger we've seen, so we're putting it just, it's always going to immobilize no matter what. Removing the ammo, because immobilize on ammo wouldn't be the best, but hopefully it goes a bit more usable. Pry bar, hitting some targets, so, you know, better down cleave, use it in World v World, hit more people. Pry bar already hits pretty hard, so just hitting more targets with it seems pretty good. Next on an overcharge slot, we're increasing their missile velocity, I believe, by about 20%. Sometimes these skills had trouble actually hitting their targets. They're pretty good when they do land, but when they don't, they're not, so hopefully they land a bit more. Those are small changes, so we can go to the next page. These are going to be some firearm changes that we talked about.
Oh boy, hang on. Serrated Steel. This trait now also causes crit strikes to inflict bleeding and is moved to Adept Minor slot. Modified Ammo has been moved to Grandmaster Minor. Sharpshooter has been reworked and moved to the slot left by Modified Ammunition. Bleeding scales with power. Bleeding scales with power instead of Condi damage at a reducer. So it's like Inferno. So, okay, so they're giving Engineer a trait similar to the trait that they gave to Elementalist. Equal and opposite reaction. This trait has been moved to Alchemy, replacing Purity of Purpose. Oh no, Purity of Purpose was fun. Heavy Metal. This trait fills the slot left by equal and opposite reaction. Your crit strike chance and critical damage is increased against enemies below the health threshold. This begins against enemies below 75% health and increases further against enemies below 50 and 25% health.
A trait shuffle, we're merging some traits and moving some things so that in the end we're going to add 2 new Grandmasters. The first thing that's happening is Serrated Steel. This is the Grandmaster Minor that just increases your bleeding duration. It's being merged with the Minor trait that causes you to bleed when you critically strike, so they're going to be one trait. And in that Minor slot, we're moving Modified Ammunition there. Modified Ammunition was a Grandmaster trait that we feel like wasn't really worth being a Grandmaster. Deadly Arts on Thief has this as a passive already as their minor trait. And as a trait, it was good in PvE when you always have like conditions on bosses, but in competitive game modes, it really had no value. So we're putting it there and lowering its value a bit so we can add some new Grandmaster traits. Equal and opposite reaction, this is a new trait that from the June patch that we added, that we like what it does, but we feel like it maybe wasn't the correct place for it to be. So we're moving it down to the alchemy line, so it can be optioned there, and we're deleting Purity of Purpose. We'll talk about that in just a second. But if you've been following the shuffle and the math, we have 2 new Grandmaster slots. So the first one is going to be Sharpshooter. It's basically going to be Bleeding Inferno. Inferno was another trait we added in the June patch for Elementalist, and it was, you know, pretty interesting. A lot of build options opened up. So we're going to try that with Engineer. We felt like it was natural for the line to see what happens when bleeding scales off power on an Engineer. Have some, you know, it synergizes with the new Serrated Steel, and then also we have other bleeding sources like shrapnel grenades, and yeah, explosive lines, the shrapnel trait there. And then the next Grandmaster is going to be Heavy Metal. This one's going to be more of your generic power DPS bonus. It's Executioner, but instead of just a flat bonus, it's going to give you both critical strike damage and critical strike chance. So the lower people are, the more crit chance, crit damage you'll have against them to create a more interesting damage profile for Engineer. Be able to get that crit chance that Firearms is really good at. So hopefully the goal from this line would be more options and more ways to play with it, because before it was a pretty static line where you just took the same traits and it didn't really change your playstyle, but we're hoping with the new Grandmasters that, you know, be more interesting, more things to play around and think about when making a Firearms build.
All right, indeed. Moving on to the next slide.
Yep, and these are going to be both the Alchemy and Tools changes I talked about. Backpack Regenerator. This trait was not very good, and then we also realized we don't want it to be good. It was pretty passive, so we're deleting it and creating a new trait called Blast Zone. It just creates a blast finisher when you use your healing football skill. Some healing toolbox skills create like a field automatically, so if it's a water field...
That was quite the line. We realized we didn't want it to be good.
One, you're going to blast. They're going to be both the alchemy and tools change that I talked about. Backpack regenerator. This trait was not very good, and then we also realized we don't want it to be good. It was pretty passive, so we're deleting it and creating a new trait called Blast Zone. It just creates a blast finisher when you use your healing toolbox skill. Some healing toolbox skills create like a field automatically, so if it's a water field one, you're going to blast a water field automatically, but if not, you can blast might, blast stealth, what have you, when using that, so just some extra synergy there with things alchemy already wants to do. HGH. This trait is getting Fury in PvE only. Fury was sometimes a rough spot for engineer supports. Mechanist was able to cover
They would
it.
often use
Relic.
Relic.
Like a scrapper and amalgam. It really wasn't something that was covered. So we're adding it there, so to open up some Relic synergies, potentially. And then, hold on 1 second. Gotta hydrate.
Oh, yeah.
Going back, Purity of Purpose was being deleted for Equal and Opposite. Purity of Purpose was also a trait that was pretty not used in PvE, and then when it was used in competitive game modes, we just really didn't like the gameplay it had, so we decided to get rid of it. Equal and Opposite should be a more selfish trait for the alchemy trait line for people that want boons. It gives pretty good ones, so that's what's happening there. And then the last change is chain reactivity. The third successful trigger is now going to grant barrier to allies at a reduced rate. So this was a selfish trait to begin with, but now the third trigger is going to get some team support. We wanted this to be a go-to option if you wanted team support. Now that Purity of Purpose is deleted, or you didn't need the Fury from HGH. So that's the purpose here. And then lastly, we go into some tools updates. Optimized activation. This is just quality of life for the trait. The Grandmaster Minor in the trait line gives you damage when you have Vigor, so this is just giving you more Vigor in PvE, so more uptime on the damage bonus by yourself. Kinetic Battery. This is a similar trigger to what Cal talked about in Battle Power and Elementalist. We're adding a damage strike bonus when this triggers. It already gives you super speed and quickness, pretty good. This is a trait that is very good on Hollowsmith because it procs when you go in and out of Hollow Forge with your F5. And so I think something we're thinking about is splitting the effectiveness, like making it more effective if you're an Amalgam or a Scrapper because they can't proc it as often. That's something we're still thinking about for now. Right now, this is going to be, I give you that strike damage increase. So in PvE, the tools line already has some good damage mods. So this can be another one to give to make it even more competitive. Something to take. Then lastly, Adrenal Implants. This is getting a bit of a rework. Right now, all it does is increase your endurance regen rate by 50%, which is super strong, but it's also kind of boring. So we're reducing it to 25%, but adding an additional effect that when you dodge, the recharge of your toolbox skills will be decreased, and that will create kind of a loop that you get where you dodge. You can use them. Optimized activation will give you more vigor, and then you can dodge a bit more, you know, that whole feeding into each other. So hopefully the gameplay of the trait is more interesting than what it is now.
A lot of trait updates and shuffles around. You know, are we kind of expecting this, especially, you know, from the previous slide, a lot of the DPS traits, are we expecting that to sort of increase a lot of the, I guess, you know, damage that DPS engineer specs are doing? And if so, are we, you know, what are we planning on doing about that?
Yeah, I think right now we're not trying to increase the overall damage of Engineer. We just want to make how it deals damage a bit more interesting. So with these, we're likely to decrease some of the numbers. I think with Modified Ammunition and PvE, it'll likely go down to accommodate for the new damage increases that those Grandmasters are giving. We know in Worldly World that, you know, DPS NG is also super good, and so we're likely to make some downward adjustments on that end as well to make room for these new things.
Now, I don't know if they planned these notes before the most recent balance patch. Since the most recent balance patch, I've mostly had the PvP itch, so I've been doing a lot of that. Ship is using a scratching post, if you hear that, sorry. I'll say in PvP, right now, since the most recent patch, good engineers are terrifying. They, especially the amalgams, especially amalgams, but they are extremely bursty, very high damage. Now, I don't think they're, like, the most OP thing, but their damage is very, very high if they know what they're doing.
Very cool. Thank you, Taylor. All right. Moving on to Guardian. We can have Cal talk about that.
All right, Guardian. So we're kicking things off here. There's obviously some changes to the Zeal trait line, and we'll see a couple more like quality of life improvements on the next slide. But the main focus of the update here is kind of this Zeal, a little bit of shuffle, a little bit of reworks here. Starting off with Zealot's Resolution, this is a trait that's just very difficult to actually...
Real quick, Zealot's Resolution trait now triggers when striking an enemy under the health threshold instead of when you are struck below the health threshold. Symbolic Avenger trait moved to the Grandmaster Minor slot, replacing Symbolic Power. Furious Focus trait moved to the Grandmaster tier slot left by Symbolic Avenger and has been reworked. It now increases the player's strength damage and movement speed while under the effects of Fury, and creates lesser symbol of blades when activating Virtue Skill 1. Renewing Splendor. This trait fills the Master Tier slot left by Furious Focus. Heal yourself when you create a light field or finish a combo in a light field. Just thinking of how crazy Luminary is with light fields right now.
Utilize, because it triggers when you are taking damage. When you fall below the health threshold and you are struck under that health threshold is when it creates the symbol. It's a little counterproductive to what you're actually trying to do as someone who's probably playing the Zeal trait line. You want to be that aggressive damage dealing Guardian spec. So that's going to trigger when you strike an enemy that's under that health threshold. It's going to be that same 75%. So you get a little bit of damage onto your enemy, and then that's going to trigger that extra symbol. And that's going to be triggering some traits, doing some damage, just working the way that you probably want it to, and kind of the way that we want it to is just be more, I guess, intuitive in how it works, but also just better to play with. Then we see kind of a similar Grandmaster to Grandmaster Minor shuffle that we saw with Modified Ammunition with Symbolic Avenger. This is a trait that, again, is pretty basic in what it does. It does have that symbol hook, but that is already kind of the core theming of the Zeal trait line, is that it has a lot of those symbol hooks. And so we thought it felt a lot more natural as the Grandmaster Minor, because it is a little bit more powerful than Symbolic Power as well. That is a trait that increased the damage of your symbols, which is good, but it is a little bit less good overall, because it is just a very specific subset of skills that are maybe more difficult to land damage on in certain situations. So just having the more natural damage modifier in that slot, and it's still going to have that symbol hook, because it is as you strike enemies with your symbols, you get that damage buff, but that's going to be in your Grandmaster Minor right now. That opens the door for a new Grandmaster trait, of course. Furious Focus. This is a name that was used on a Master Tier trait, but it's getting a little bit of a rework here, shuffling into that Grandmaster slot. The way it's going to work, it does have a Fury theme, so keeping the Furious Focus made a lot of sense. Keeping that name made a lot of sense. The way it's going to work is that while you are under the effects of Fury, you are going to have increased outgoing strike damage and increased movement speed. It's not going to be a stacking movement speed. Fury is a little bit easier to gain access to. It's kind of inspired a little bit by Aggressive Onslaught over in the Warrior trait lines, where that is a trait that gives you move speed while you have quickness. That is obviously a stacking movement speed buff, because quickness is a little bit more difficult to have. This one's just going to be more like you have swiftness as long as you have Fury, essentially, but it won't stack with other movement speed increases. So it will be nice for Guardian, which is typically a little bit on the slower side, unless you have, say, a movement trait in Dragon Hunter trait line. But as long as you have Fury now, you'll be moving faster, dealing more damage, and kind of the extra fun component of this trait is that when you activate Virtue Skill 1, you're going to create a lesser symbol of blades. So this is obviously the Fury symbol. That is going to do some damage, give you some Fury. That's going to give you the bonuses of this trait, of course. Do a little bit more damage. Trigger your symbol traits in this trait line. Should be pretty fun. There will be like a 10-second cooldown on that or something along those lines, just to make sure that it doesn't go too crazy in World v. World with something like the new Justice. But you will be able to get a good chunk of Symbol of Blades. And then last up, we now have that open slot in the Master Tier trait line from Furious Focus moving. This is going to be a more defensive focus trait, Renewing Splendor. Now, whenever you create a light field or combo in a light field, you will heal yourself. So this obviously has a lot of synergy with symbols that are all light fields. Some of you may recognize about half of this functionality used to be on the Greatsword trait in the trait line. It used to be when you combo in a light field, it would heal you. And that got removed when the Greatsword trait became just more raw damage focused. But we do like the idea of having that defensive option in Zeal. We've seen a lot of trait lines have success. A lot of the damage dealing trait lines have a lot of good success with more of that hybrid bruisery type of trait option that you can opt into. Obviously, you can still go full damage, but then you can also have the option to get a little bit more sustain, a little bit more defense. And so kind of the natural fit for the symbol trait line was that creating a light field, comboing in a light field would be a nice little trigger for that. So obviously you can create a symbol, or maybe create a wall of reflection. There's a lot of light fields that are not symbols. This will be anytime you create a light field or combo in a light field, you will get a little bit of healing. There will be a slight cooldown on whirl finishers, as we've done with a lot of similar traits, where you can only trigger that once every few seconds, so that you don't get a massive heal every time you whirl.
Nice. Would you call this more of kind of an update to maybe an outdated or slightly outdated specialization line, or are we making these changes in order to kind of fill kind of a role that Guardian might be lacking in some modes?
I think there's definitely a lot of traits in this line that felt a little bit outdated. Furious Focus was a good example of a trait that just isn't super valuable. I think maybe there's even some other traits that we were considering adjusting in Zeal that didn't quite, we didn't quite have like the right plans for. So there might be some additional updates in the future, but it's definitely the case that some of the Zeal traits felt a little bit outdated. Something like Zealot's Resolution, where the usability is just very poor, or having that, very straightforward strike damage multiplier on the Grandmaster trait without any additional hook. Those are things that we're typically going to be looking at to update going forward, I would say.
Cool. Awesome. All right, moving on. We've got another Guardian slide. Cal mentioned this a little bit with some slightly quality of life changes.
Virtue of Courage now breaks stun. I mean, that's awesome, but they just have a stun break just baked into their bar now. Symbol of Energy projectile is now unblockable. And Shield of Courage now breaks stun.
Yeah, so we just see obviously Virtue of Courage, Shield of Courage. These are both getting the stun break baseline. We've seen this is something that we tried with the Luminary Courage, where it would just stun break for yourself and you would not have to take Indomitable Courage to get that stun break component. And we've seen, I think this worked pretty well. We like the idea of reducing the reliance on the Virtue straight line for, especially in competitive modes. That's such a important effect, and the stability is good and the ally stun break is good, but for you yourself, the Guardian, especially a skill like Virtue of Courage, which the active is just grant Aegis AoE, so it's pretty mediocre. So much of its power level is assuming that you're playing the Virtue straight line.
Grant Aegis AoE, mediocre, and it's just on the hotbar, always, bro. You're saying an AoE Aegis that is always accessible to you, no matter your build, is mediocre. Okay.
And it's still going to be very good with the Virtue straight line.
Found the Guardian,
man. It's such a strong trait, but we're hoping that this maybe opens the door just a little bit, that you can, get this stun break so you can get a little bit further away from Virtues if you so choose, especially in competitive modes.
Oh, of course.
Symbol of Energy, then this is a nice little quality of life, usability improvement. The projectile didn't actually do anything other than create a symbol on the ground, so the question...
Chat, this is a real question. Is there any other class in the game that if they have 0 traits selected, 0 specializations, and 0 utility skills selected on their bar, that has a stun break? Or Aegis. Either of them. Mesmer Shatter can do you an invuln for a moment, if they've already got clones out. Well, no, clones would just increase the duration of it.
Of whether it should be destroyed by projectile destruction, we decided the answer is no. The strikes from the symbol will obviously still be blockable, but you will now be able to freely create your symbol of energy through...
Aegis on Ranger Pet? That requires a specific pet from a specific expansion, and that Aegis is not instant. It has a cast time. So, it's not as good.
Swarm of projectile destruction, commonly in World v World, but that does come up now and then in other game modes. So a nice little usability improvement, I would call it.
Absolutely. All right, great. Thank you so much. That's going to wrap up Guardian Force, and we can move on to Mesmer with Taylor.
Yep, Mesmer. Mostly for this patch, is going to focus around Chronomancer. Back when Troubadour was revealed and we talked about it, we talked about how Heal Chronomancer is a very strong build, probably too strong, and so we're taking some measures to reduce it. Large majority of them are focused...
Whoa! Signet of Humility. Moa's Signet in PvE. Reduce cooldown, but reduce Defiance damage by almost half. One of the most famous CC tools in the game just got slapped. Dang. Phantasmal Sharpshooter. Reduce the ammo count from 2 to 1 in PvE. What is that? Rifle 4 or something? Mental Collapse. Reduce stun duration from 3 to 2 in PvE. Illusionary Aspiration. Reduced outgoing healing modifier from 15 to 5 in PvE and World v World. And from 10 to 5 in PvP.
Around reducing its Defiance damage capabilities, as you'll see here. First thing is Signet of Humility. We're reducing the cooldown, but also the amount of Defiance damage it deals. Should hopefully be a good option for Mesmers wanting a Defiance damage in that slot, but not as effective on Chronomancers. When Chronos are able to use it, especially with Continuum splits, it is a lot of Defiance damage that eclipses almost every other purpose.
Okay, wait, all right, look, I'm not a Mesmer main. I do not have a horse in this race. However, he just said, we're nerfing this because of Chronos. Why are you nerfing it for Virtuosos and Mirages and Troubadours because of Chronos? Like, just a moment ago, they said that they were adjusting a trait. They had this trait, but they were like, if you take fresh air, this trait is worse. Just do that here. Just say, here's Signet of Humility. But if you have Chronos selected, it's worse. You don't have to nerf it for the other 3 elite specs if Chrono's the problem.
So we're turning it down there. Phantasmal Sharpshooter is also getting its ammo count reduced, which is less CC. Mental Collapse, less CC. And then Illusionary Inspiration is getting its outgoing healing modifier reduced. We just want the total healing of Chronomancer and basically all Mesmers and all game modes to go down just a little bit. Troubadour has its own outgoing healing modifier, so if we feel like it needs to go up itself, we can do that. But for globally for Mesmer, we just want this bonus to be a bit smaller. Then we can go into the actual specific changes for Chronomancer. The first one is going to be Well of Precognition. We're increasing its...
All right, hold on, pause. Well of Precognition, increase the cooldown from 30 to 60 seconds in PvE. Wow. I admit, that's a good skill. Maybe we could do 45? Like, doubling it is a lot. I maybe would have tried, like, 45. Will of Senility, reduce the day's duration from 3 to 2 seconds in PvE. Gravity Well, reduce the knockdown duration from 3 to 2 seconds. Danger Time, this trait not longer, increases crit strike damage against enemies with slow, instead grants crit strike damage bonus when you inflict slow on an enemy. Improved Alacrity has been removed! It's gone! Replaced by Time Bomb. Enemies struck by Time Sink are affixed with Time Bomb. Time Bombs increase your strike damage to the target and explode when they expire. Time Marches On. This trait no longer reduces the duration of incoming movement impairing conditions, and now increases the effectiveness of Alacrity on you. Wait. So they just, like, improved Alacrity? Okay, so they just relocated it.
Cooldown from 30 seconds to 60 seconds, which is a very large change, but this is also a very strong skill. So
hold on, I'm gonna look at their chat.
It gives your team both stability and Aegis, so you can negate...
Trash! Wow! 1 minute Well of Precog! What?!
Well of Senility...
RIP Chrono!
CC duration's reduced, so this should be a lot of crowd control reduction. Do want to point out
good
that
job, Anet, I quit.
Has a ton of CC splits. It's a very strong cooldown, I think twice, so I wouldn't say that Chronomancer are going to be hurting for Defiance damage after this, just more in line with other classes. Gravity Well, specifically on competitive mode, should not change. We're reducing the knockdown duration everywhere, but there still shouldn't be a moment where people can dodge out of it. It will true combo into itself, just so people were reading that and worried. But we want to get into the trait changes now. There's only 3 changes, but these are pretty impactful. A lot of them are
Alright, so I want to share a thought right here. Well of Precognition is really freaking good. It is a skill that makes your brain generate the happy juice, alright? For anyone who doesn't play Mesmer, it is just one of those amazing things. What it does is you throw it on the ground, and it's like Aegis, stability, like on the group. It pulses it 3 times. So it is very idiot-proof. Stability and Aegis are both things where they're not boons you keep up all the time. They're boons that you use on demand. And if there is a demand for it, you want it to be very precise. You don't want to throw Aegis and Stability out and they get consumed by some crappy hit, and then the big hit comes and kills your team because you timed it poorly. Well of Precog, because it did application, second application, third application, it was very noob-friendly. It was idiot-proof. However, it was also just flat out better than most other classes' stability option. Like Druid, Glyph of Equality, you use that and it's just 1 stack of stability, 1 time, and then it goes on cooldown. And this thing did 3 stabilities back to back to back, and Aegis and endurance gain in all of this stuff on the same cooldown as the Druid one that was just a single application. So it was absolutely better. But doubling the cooldown, the problem with that is there are plenty of fights where you need ideally a stability application on your party every 20 to 30 seconds. Which means Well of Precog is no longer enough for that. So they're going to have to bring more sources. And then they might just choose not to bring Well of Precog in the first place. Still an amazing skill, but doubling the cooldown means this has gone from being enough stability for some fights to not enough, simply because of how spaced out the moments where you need it are.
Feedback from the June patch when we touched Danger Time and kind of readjusted some damage modifiers there. We wanted to make Danger Time a more appealing option, but there was resounding feedback that people didn't want to take Danger Time because it meant dropping Improved Alacrity. Improved Alacrity contributes a lot to the actual gameplay feel of Chronomancer, and we feel like if something is that gameplay changing and people like playing with that much, it shouldn't be an option. So we're putting it on a Grandmaster minor trait. Time Marches On is now going to increase the effectiveness of Alacrity on you. It's going to be 50%, just like Improved Alacrity now. In competitive modes, it'll be decreased a little bit because we're also removing the drawback of decreasing Alacrity on you. So yeah, about
someone in chat is pointing out with the improved alacrity and continuum split that they're saying they're guesstimating you could get the Well of Precog cooldown back down to 30 seconds. Which, if so, great. I would say that makes it more skill capped. So I would say the how can I phrase this? I'm trying to. I'm like, how do I sprinkle sugar on this statement? All right, I'll just say it. That means the bad Chrono players will look worse. The good Chrono players will look the same. That's what I'm seeing in this. If it's going to require proper use of continuum split and IAS to make Well of Precog stay as what it is now, then that means the Chrono players that are, newbier are going to look worse, and the ones that were really good are going to look the same. That's what I'm worried about.
33% in competitive modes. Basically now, no matter what you choose in your master tier, you will always have improved alacrity. Danger Time is also being changed because we got feedback when we changed it that it encouraged too many specific team comps and stacking it. It was good based on the slow you could apply yourself, but when everyone else applying slow, it was hard to get it to a right number where it wouldn't be too strong or too weak. So we're changing it now so that when you apply slow to an enemy, it grants you a bonus, and it no longer relies on the enemy you hit having slow. The last change is that there's going to be there's a slot open now that Improved Alacrity no longer exists as a master tier trait, and we're going to be adding a new trait called Time Bomb. Time Bomb is when you hit an enemy with Time Sync, you're going to attach like a time bomb to them, basically. And it's going to tick down over time, and in 5 seconds it'll explode. Well, the enemy you hit has a time bomb on them, you are going to deal increased strike damage to them. And so it kind of creates a moment of time where you're going to hit someone with Time Sync, they're going to get this time bomb attached to them. You're going to want to fit a lot of your damage into it, into a natural burst window trait, and then they're going to explode, hitting them and all nearby enemies. So Time Bomb is now going to be kind of the burst DPS trait we envisioned, and Danger Time is going to take the role as a more sustained damage increase trait.
You mentioned the damage on Time Bomb when it explodes, it'll hit enemies around the person who's targeted with it. Is that damage dodgeable?
You can dodge the damage. If the person with the time bomb on them dodges, the damage will still go off. So people around them have to move away. The person with the time bomb should probably move out of their allies if they have it on them. But it is blockable, dodgeable. But you got to make sure you predict it coming because a smart Chronomancer can.
I wonder if you're in PvP and someone puts a time bomb on you, I'm wondering if you will have a red circle attached to your feet. I would hope so. So that you can, be like, oh, step away from my ally, and then dodge roll this, that kind of thing. I would expect it would.
They know that a burst is about to happen on them, so the person will want to dodge so they can, use their other skills around that.
Makes sense. Very cool. All right, thank you, Taylor. Moving on, it is everyone's favorite green class, Necromancer.
Untamed. Oh.
Who's going to start us off with this?
Yeah, so starting off, we have some spite traits. I guess there's a slight blood magic adjustment here, but this is because of...
Okay, hang on. Spiteful Renewal has been moved to blood magic and named Blood Renewal, replacing Blood Bond. Malicious Swarm. This trait fills the adept tier slot in Spiteful Renewal. Cast Lesser Signet of the Locust when you use your healing skill. Was Signet of the Locust, was that the one that pulls all conditions to you from other people? Hold on a sec. I'm rusty. Locust. Let me see. Signet of the Locust. I'm looking at the thing. Let's see. Active. Strike and remove boons from nearby foes. Heal for each foe you strike and for each boon removed. Okay, no, I was thinking of something else. So this one is not the pull condies to you. This is the pull boons from nearby enemies and then heal for each enemy you hit. That's what the full version of Signet of the Locust does. So this is going to be a lesser version of that.
Distance for making the spike trait line. So the first things first, we see Spiteful Renewal is moving to the blood magic trait line and being renamed because it doesn't make sense for it to be named Spiteful something if it's no longer in the spike trait line. That'll replace Blood Bond. And this kind of started because we were thinking of, well, should Blood Bond actually be a spite trait because it is a signet trigger? You know, we have the signet trait there.
Muck, you have the wiki page with links to every skill mentioned already open. Okay, listen here, Mr. Smarty Pants. All right, let's make fun of you for a second. I wanted to know what Signet of the Locust does. Lesser Signet of the Locust doesn't exist yet, therefore it doesn't have a link. So I had to go to the Signet of the Locust page to read what it does, because the lesser one doesn't exist. Okay, back to you, Roy.
It has a little bit of that,
or Cal,
like,
whatever.
life-stealing sustain. We want to get a little bit of that sustain into spite. You know, similar to what we talked about with Zeal. It's like a lot of the best damage-dealing trait lines do have that option to flex into a little bit more defense as well. And the answer was that it probably didn't make sense for Signet of Vampirism specifically to be in the spite trait line. So we've just ended up moving Spiteful Renewal, replacing Blood Bond. That trigger doesn't exist anymore. Malicious Swarm is the new trait in that trait spot that is going to cast Lesser Signet of the Locust, which is a little bit more thematic for spite. You know, Signet of Spite is an option that we talked about as the spite trait line. There are a lot of questions around what is a Lesser Signet of Spite anyway.
Locusts are notoriously known as the most spiteful of the insecticide.
Yes, exactly. But the question of, like, should it apply all these conditions for such shorter duration? Should it apply a subset of these conditions? It's probably still too many of the conditions that Signet of Spite applies. And we wanted to have, like, some of that defensive replacement as well anyway, so Signet of the Locust made a lot of sense. It has that Boon Rip. It's only going to be one Boon Rip on the lesser version, but that will give you a little bit extra Boon Rip, which is something that Spite really likes to do. So we felt that Signet of the Locust was a good fit. So instead of Blood Bond being in the Blood Magic trait line, we will now see Malicious Swarm casting Lesser Signet of the Locust in the Spite trait line. The healing will obviously be reduced as well, but it will be a nice little heal, some Boon Rip, you know, heal based off enemy struck, heal based off boons removed. So it can be a pretty solid bonus of a little bit of healing off of your healing skill trigger as well. The next change is actually pretty big. Awaken the Pain, moving to the Master Miner. Death's Embrace is a great example of an outdated trait where, you know, this is a trait that increases your damage while you're down and also have like a small vulnerability trigger against low health enemies. Pretty weak. Not something that you're really taking the spite trait line to get. You know, you're taking it to get other things, and it turns out...
Hang on. I want to read this. Awaken the Pain has been moved to Master Miner slot, replacing Death's Embrace, and no longer causes Might to grant less condition damage. Spiteful Fortitude now fills the Master Tier slot left by Awaken the Pain. Gain Vitality based on your power, and gain Life Force when you strike an enemy below 50% health. I wonder if there's an ICD on that, or if it's every time. Dread, this trait now grants a short bonus to outgoing strike damage when fearing an enemy, and no longer reduces the recharge of Shroud Skill 3 when killing an enemy.
Death's Embrace, and you probably didn't even notice that you have Death's Embrace. So Awaken the Pain, you know, Spite is very much the Might trait line, so having this Super Might augment be something that you always get is going to make a lot of sense, and we've removed the downside of that. It's no longer going to reduce condition damage because there are situations where you are playing a Necro build that is a condition-focused build, but you are taking the Spite trait line because there are good things. You know, maybe you now want to get Lesser Signet of the Locust, maybe you want to get Spiteful Fortitude now, get some extra Vitality, extra Life Force. So we didn't want to, you know, reduce the effectiveness of all conditions builds that play Spite. So you are just going to get the improved power on Might from Awaken the Pain and not get the reduced condition damage. And we'll still have that Might as you enter Shroud as well, so really good trait, but it is just core to the Spite trait line now. That's getting replaced with Spiteful Fortitude. This is, again, going to be a little bit more of that defensive-focused Spite trait, so you can see a Vitality conversion, Power to Vitality conversion, rather. So based off your power, you'll get some Vitality, which gives you more health, which gives you larger Life Force pool. Pretty good for Necro. Then you're also going to be getting a little bit of Life Force, you know, 1% Life Force when you strike an enemy that's below 50% health with ICD. We've seen kind of the strength of this type of trigger in Reaper especially, just getting that like extra 1% life force every second if you are fulfilling that condition can add up over time, and it's a nice little sustain, a little nice extra fuel.
I don't know what it is about this page. I'm like reading and rereading this page. Like I'm having trouble staying awake right now. This is like my 8th grade teacher just asked me to read The Hobbit, and I'm just sitting here on page 1 just over and over and over. I don't know if it's Cal or the page itself.
So it felt like a nice little addition on top of the extra vitality. And kind of that striking low health enemies is also pretty thematic to Spite, so it felt like a really good thematic fit for the trait line as well. And the last change here, we have a small update to Dread. We wanted to make it feel just a little bit more powerful as a damage-dealing trait. You know, obviously if we have Close to Death in the same spot, that is supposed to be more that executioner style of trait. But Dread's actually a pretty fun trait. You know, we see a lot of players that like playing with Dread, getting that quickness. The Fury is nice too, but of course the quickness is nice. Now it's going to give you a little bit of a very short burst of outgoing strike damage when you inflict fear, very similar to Danger Time. You know, we did talk about, well, should this trait just say deal more damage to feared foes? And, you know, that gameplay isn't necessarily as good. It incentivizes certain compositions to apply like a bunch of different sources of fear. So now it's just going to be like that same, basically the same reasoning that Taylor mentioned for Danger Time is why we're keeping this a little bit more contained, a little bit more of when you apply fear, you'll get a little burst of damage. So now that is going to be when you inflict fear, you're getting that quickness, getting that fury, getting that burst of damage, nice little bursty DPS trait. And then we've removed the cooldown component of that in exchange for the extra damage burst.
Very cool. You did mention, you know, with at least one of these traits that you felt, you know, maybe it was a bit outdated, and that's why we were making these changes or these swaps. But we do see Spite taken a lot, especially in a lot of World versus World builds. So are we kind of expecting these changes to just kind of change how those are playing? Are these buffs to those builds? Also, you know, is the goal with these changes to maybe see Spite being played in other game modes as well as World versus World?
Yeah, I mean, definitely think that it has more potential, especially like PvP, or like these extra defensive options, or these, you know, maybe playing Malicious Swarm, playing Spiteful Fortitude. These are maybe a little bit more PvP slanted, where you want that extra self-survivability, where, you know, you still have your support, but maybe you're hoping to be a little bit less reliant on your support than you are in World v World, because you're not always going to be with them. So just giving a little more of that like bruisery, a little bit of defense, but still a lot of offense type of Necro. Maybe we see it with Reaper, maybe we see it with, you know, maybe with Harbinger, maybe with some of the other elite specs as well, but, you know, Spite Reaper could be something. Taylor and I have been theory crafting the Spite Death Reaper for like a long time now. You know, you get Bitter Chill, which obviously you couldn't take Malicious Swarm, but like taking Bitter Chill to fuel your Corruptor's Fervor to get all those extra Carapace stacks is like an interesting concept. Maybe it ends up being real with these, like, you know, being able to take Spiteful Fortitude now and the little extra oomph from Dread as well.
All right, very cool. But yes, moving on, we've got some Greatsword changes as well for Necro.
Greatsword changes. Death Spiral. The skill no longer grants life force and instead steals life from enemies that it strikes. Reduce the power coefficient from 1.8 to 1.6 in PvP and World v World. Reduced aftercast by 0.2 seconds. Steals life from enemies. Nightfall will now only convert moons to conditions and blind enemies on the initial strike. Reduced pulse interval from 2 to 1. This skill now also grants protection to the Necromancer and grants life force to the Necromancer every interval if they are in the area. So Nightfall made like a black puddle and it would expand a bit. And it was a decent zoning tool. Like, they didn't want to be in it because it would constantly blind and remove their conditions. This feels like if I'm fighting the Necro and they put this down, I'm not going to care. Like, I'm no longer going to feel like either it's on me and I've already been hit by the only blind it's going to do, or it missed me and moving into it is not going to bother me. It's just whether or not they're in it. So, I mean, the protection is going to be good for the Necro, but I will say it feels like it loses its role as a zoning tool, IMO. Grasping Darkness, this skill now also grants quickness to the Necro if it strikes an enemy. That's kind of nasty. So Grasping Darkness is the pull. So if they successfully pull you, you're now in the face of a Reaper with quickness. Bonk.
Yeah, some pretty big ones, especially the second note, but we'll talk about the first note because it is the 3 skill and not the 4 skill. Death Spiral. So this is kind of in a similar vein of thinking of, we want there to be a little more like bruisery, a little bit of extra defense, a little bit more personal defense, personal sustain for the Necro themselves. And Greatsword is like kind of that pretty slow, lumbering, like weapon type that is generally pretty thematic to like that bruiser type playstyle. And so we obviously have the big damage coming out from Gravedigger. We already have some CC on there with Grasping Darkness. Death Spiral was very much like just a second damage skill, but we already have Gravedigger, so we felt that there was room to. We see the damage coming down a little bit in PvP World v World because we wanted to add a little bit more utility. We'll see a little bit more utility on Nightfall as well. But it's now going to lifesteal instead of giving life force. We'll see the life force back on Nightfall, but this is intended to be a little bit more of that. You know, you still get damage out of lifestealing, but it's also going to be a little bit more survivability for you as a Necro. So really leaning into that more bruisery playstyle for a Greatsword. Reducing the aftercast a bit as well, because the aftercast on this skill is actually really long. And we've been trying to clean up a lot of these cases over. I mean, it's been a few years now, where you'll go back and see a lot of aftercast reduction patch notes where You know, there are some skills that have like half a second.
Here, hang on, Chad, hang on. I've never needed this before. Someone just linked me a Chrome extension that can increase volume by up to 600%, which might be enough for Cal. Hang on a second. Let's see. Add extension. Let's see. Yes, sell my soul. That's fine. All right. Let's see. Where are we right now? 55 minutes in? Hold on. I'm going to refresh this for a moment. And pause. Let's see. Is this it? Is that it? No, that's Franker Faces. Where did it go? Wait me 1 sec. I'm trying to see if I can fix this quickly. Where does it go? Click the puzzle icon. Is it under here? Power sound. There we go.
Clunky to use, for lack of a better word. So we'll go back and try to clean these up as we see them. With that out of the way, we can talk about Nightfall. This is kind of the biggest change that we'll see here. This is a skill that has been historically problematic, especially in World v. World. The cooldown is...
I am afraid for when Taylor opens his mouth now.
Significantly higher than it is in other game modes because it is that pulsing boon corrupt. So as we're looking at this greatsword weapon, you know, we want Nightfall to have a little bit of that defensive utility as well. You know, it does have the pulsing blind already, but we want to add a little bit more as we are. I guess the important thing is that we've moved a lot of that boon corrupt onto the initial strike. So it's not going to corrupt boons anymore, but you still have that big moment of the initial strike's going to do that boon.
Sound is way better. Yes, thank you. I only had to download an extension increasing volume by up to 600%. Oh, man. Yo, I love the ANET team. It was awesome meeting them the time that I got the chance to. But they should really test these broadcasts for like a minute before each broadcast.
It's going to do that blind. The blind move, because we sped this skill up a lot, it's going to grow faster and it's going to pulse faster. We see that every 1 second instead of every 2 seconds. Part of that is because now it's going to be pulsing life force to you if you are standing inside of it. And we didn't want you to have to stand in that for 8 seconds to get the full value. Now it's only going to be like 4 seconds. Also get a little bit of protection while you are... Oh, that's actually going to happen on the initial cast as well. The idea is that you're kind of shrouded by the shadows, so a little bit of defense flavor in there as well. But this will, you know, give a lot more impact to the initial moment, kind of what we talked about with like Pyro Vortex on Weaver before, where we want to have those more discrete moments of things so that the counterplay feels a little bit more natural instead of having to run out of the Nightfall to avoid all of the pulses. Now you just need to avoid that initial strike to get out of that boon corrupt. Obviously, it's still going to be pulsing the damage, and it's still going to be kind of an area of power for the Necro now, but it will have a bit better counterplay to that boon corruption and that blind. And last up, we have a fun little note here with Grasping Darkness. This is going to grant you quickness if you strike an enemy. This won't be per hit or anything like that, but if you strike a single enemy with Grasping Darkness, even if they don't get pulled because they have stability, it's just an on-hit trigger, you will get a burst of quickness. So that's obviously very fun with Gravedigger, which is kind of that intentionally slower casting time, that big sweeping strike, the big moment of big damage. Now it's a bit faster.
The big moment of big damage.
We'll be able to get a few skills off with this burst of quickness as well. So maybe you land Grasping Darkness, fire off your Nightfall, hit with Death Spiral, and hit with Gravedigger. And it's a pretty fun, you know, bursty moment for Greatsword players.
Nice. So if you're old like Hal, you might remember that back before Secrets of the Obscure, Greatsword was limited or locked just to...
Wait, I'm sorry. If you're old and you remember pre-Soto. Wow. That's just like 2 or 3 years ago.
And then once, you know, we unlocked that for other classes, we saw a lot of other specs taking Greatsword, obviously a very strong weapon, especially, you know, for maybe some more support options. Even though this is, as you mentioned, kind of more intended maybe to be like a bruisery sort of weapon, you're still taking on support just because of all the support functions. So are these changes kind of aimed to maybe separate that out of the support build a little bit, or potentially just, and, you know, obviously, you know, you mentioned like usability improvements, especially in World vs. World with the cooldown and Nightfall being so high. You know, was there a specific goal with this, or, you know, again, kind of just trying to touch up some outdated skills?
Really, the starting point was Nightfall. Well, I forgot to mention it because it's not on the slide, but we are reducing the recharge time back from in World v. World from 40. It's down to like 25 now. The skill is just really, really problematic in World v. World, and you know we kind of knew that we wanted to do some stuff with Greatsword already, but Nightfall was really
Then change it in World v. World. The skill's really problematic in World v. World. We're changing it everywhere.
the starting point of okay, how can we make this especially the boon
Keep the
corrupt.
group
Like,
alive.
we need to
I'll be
make this
right
more
back.
controlled.
I want to stand
you
in
know,
the
like
fire
this
just so you don't get bored.
as an extra source of that pulsing boon corruption because it is so easy to flex into on support builds. And I won't really be surprised if those support builds are still playing
Shipmane's
Greatsword because
Necro,
you still
he's
have
mad.
that boon corrupt and you still have like the pull on Grasping Darkness. But it was just so powerful that it wasn't really a choice. It felt Greatsword was just the best option, and we nerfed the skill so much. We don't like nerfing the skill as much as we did, and we do it when it's necessary. But a lot of the time, we will try to look and see if there's like a rework somewhere down the line to allow us to bring that cooldown back down.
Tail.
And so, that, like I said, that was kind of the starting point for the Greatsword changes.
Awesome, thank you. All right, moving on from Necromancer, it's everyone's favorite green class, Ranger, and of course, our
He said
resident
green
Ranger
both sides.
expert Taylor is going to talk about these changes.
Yeah, so on the slide, you'll notice that every single Ranger Greatsword skill is on here, and you're like, oh my god, wow, this is so crazy. They're buffing everything. This is us rolling two-handed training bonuses baseline, so a lot of these are just the cooldown reduction and damage you would get from that trait.
Okay. Mostly. So, many people, I guess, who are old remember that there was a trait for almost every type of weapon in the game that would be like, reduce the cooldown of all skills on this weapon by 20%. And it is true, they missed some. The Ranger two-hand training reduced the cooldown of spear and greatsword skills by 20%. Now, at the time that it was made, spear was underwater only. So I don't even know if it applied to land spear or not, but underwater spear and greatsword still had a 20% trait. I think our throwing axe still has a 20% reduced cooldown trait. So now the reason I paused to read this is because I don't know about y'all's classes, but they cheated the Ranger. For example, when they got rid of the reduced trap cooldowns by 20% and baked it in baseline, they baked it in baseline for 1 trap out of 5. Like, they missed on most of them, or they just didn't care. Like, most of them just, like, they didn't bake it in. They did not do that. So I wanted to read this to see, like, okay, Maul reduced, Swoop reduced, Counterattack reduced, Hilt Bash reduced. Although Hilt Bash, they didn't reduce it in World v World. Actually, Counterattack, they did. Okay, so if you're a World v World enjoyer, this is worse. They did bake it in for PvP, and they buffed some numbers in PvE. They didn't bake it in for World v World. They even did Untamed Savage Slash. Interesting.
We're going to be talking about Beast Mastery today for Ranger, and some reworks in Straight Line. So that would be the first part of it, is almost all of those bonuses are going baseline to the Greatsword. It was kind of a problem where a lot of Greatsword's power was in that trait, and so it felt unplayable almost if you wanted to be like a marksmanship skirmishing Ranger and use a Greatsword.
Makes sense. All right, and we can get into the Beastmaster changes.
Yeah, so
he's not going to talk more on that. Okay, wait, hold on a sec. All right. Slash, Slice, and Enduring Swing, that's the Greatsword auto. So they damage up in PvE. Okay. Maul, reduce cooldown by 2 seconds in PvP. Increase power in PvE. Swoop, that's the movement skill. Reduce cooldown by 2 seconds in PvE, by 3 seconds in PvP. Increase the power coefficient slightly in PvE. Counterattack, that's the block. Reduce cooldown by 3 seconds in PvE and by 5 seconds in PvP. Counterattack kick, hits slightly harder in PvE. The stun, Hilt Bash, reduce cooldown by 5 seconds in PvE and PvP, and increase the damage in PvE. And the Untamed Greatsword Ambush, the damage went up in all game modes, but more in PvE. Okay.
If you wanted to be like a marksmanship skirmishing Ranger and use a Greatsword.
Makes sense. All right, and we can get into the Beastmaster changes.
Yeah, so Beast Mastery is a trait line that historically has been completely balanced around Soul Beast. It was really good if you were Soul Beast because you get all the bonuses, but...
Wait, I'm sorry, what?
And we can get into the Beastmaster changes.
Try that again?
Yeah, so Beast Mastery is a trait line that historically has been completely balanced around Soul Beast. It was really good if...
Is that why it's so messed up? Beast Mastery's older than Soul Beast. Beast Mastery's been in the game since launch. Soul Beast was added years later. What do you mean you were balancing Beast Mastery around Soul Beast? Oh my god. Dude, oh jeez. I feel like this explains so much. I don't even want to finish this video. I'm so angry. Okay, all right. All right.
If you're a soul beast, because you get all the bonuses, but if you're not a soul beast and it's just buffing your pet, it was really bad. So we're going to try and adjust that so that's not the case. The first two changes, Pack Alpha and Loud Whistle, are getting increased, specifically when you're not a merged soul beast, so speed completely to when you have a pet out. These bonuses are a starting number, might need to go higher, but that's kind of the goal of this, is to make your pet actually matter. Two-handed training, we talked about that. The trait is still going to be...
Right, hold on. The words coming out of his face are making me mad. Let's read for a minute. Pack Alpha, increase attribute increase. Okay, so Pack Alpha is a passive in the Beast Mastery line. It just makes your pet have a little bit more in all stats. They're increasing it from 150 to all stats to 300, but only in PvE. Does not apply to merge soul beast. Okay, so when you merge with your pet as a soul beast, if you have Pack Alpha, the stats would go to you, but you're not getting the bonus stats as merge soul beast. Loud Whistle, increased strike damage bonus by 5%. Increase does not apply to merge soul beast. Two-hand training, they said they're getting rid of it. This trait has been reworked to name Bestial Rage, gain might and fury when you disable a foe. Again, this two-hand training, I'm almost certain that applied to spears too, but they're only baking it into greatswords? Hang on a sec. Two-hand training. Greatsword and underwater spear skills deal more damage and recharge faster by 20%, and you gain fury when you disable a foe, and they do 10% more damage. So, they're nerfing underwater spears. Dang it. Okay. Let's see. Natural healing. This trait has been moved to the adept tier, replacing Potent Ally. What was Potent Ally? And there's not a link to it on the wiki. One sec. Hold on. I know I would understand this. You and your pet grant each other might when you crit. Oh, that one. Okay. Yeah, that one was kind of like okay if you didn't have a better thing. Natural healing is nice. It just gives a passive heal. It's like, you know, your pet heals for like 300 every 3 seconds as long as you have it. It's nice. It helps it survive some of the stupid stuff it's going to stand in. Okay, so that's going to go on the first tier. Honed Axes has been moved to the Master. Okay, Honed Axes was a Grandmaster trait. It reduced the cooldown of all axe skills by 20%, and it did some stuff with Ferocity. This trait has been moved to the Master tier, replacing Natural Healing. No longer grants extra base Ferocity to merge Soul Beast. Resounding Timbre. This trait has been reworked. Oh no. This trait now causes you to copy boons from yourself to your pet when you use a command skill. We already have that in Nature Magic. If you are a merged Soul Beast, extend the duration of boons on yourself instead. We heal... Dude, well, yeah, we... What? I don't like this line. Okay, my first thoughts is I don't like this, and I'll tell you why. In Nature Magic, there's a trait where every time you get a boon, it's copied to your pet. Just always, 100% of the time. Additionally, there is We Heal as One, which is a heal skill, and it copies all your pet's boons to you and all of your boons to your pet. You just flip-flop copy them. So if both of you have the same boons, you just double the duration of all of them pretty much. Resounding Timbre, what it did was whenever you used a command skill, like Protect Me or something, you would do regen and swiftness to a large area around you. And so it was a boost to all command skills. And now it's going to be when you use a command skill, you copy boons from yourself to your pet. So it's a thing we already had in 2 areas, and now we have a 3rd way of accessing it. I don't know. I'd rather they left that one alone, personally. Go for the Throat is a new Grandmaster trait, replacing Honed Axes. Okay, hold on. Are you going to bake in the 20% thing to axes? So they're taking away 20% recharge to axe skills. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry. They're relocating it. Are they going to leave it on there? Are they not taking away that 20% like they are with the greatswords? Okay, Go for the Throat is a new Grandmaster trait replacing Honed Axes. When you strike an enemy with a beast skill, cast Lesser Sick'em on him. Okay, Sick'em on its own puts Reveal on the target, and it also makes your pet do more damage for like 10 seconds. And also, it's a command skill. So my first thought, if it wasn't for the fact that they were getting rid of Resounding Timbre, is if they had Resounding Timbre, when you use Go for the Throat and it procced Sikkim, Sikkim would proc Resounding Timbre. Just like how right now, if you use Ally's Aid and you start rezzing someone, it will proc a lesser version of Search and Rescue, which is a command skill, which will proc Resounding Timbre because it buffs command skills, even ones from traits. But if they're gutting this, then it won't matter if this is a command skill or not. That said, this is kind of cool. I wonder if it's AoE. So, for example, if I use a pet F2 skill, like, what's something stupid that's area of effect? Okay, Marsh Drake. Marsh Drake does a breath attack, and it bounces between enemies. Kind of like a little chain lightning type effect. Will it do lesser Sikkim on everyone it hits? Or just the first target it hits? And then reduce the cooldown of pet swapping with a defeated pet from 60 seconds to 35 in PvE and PvP. That's really interesting. Because there are some pets that can do just enough damage that if the target doesn't have a lot of sustain, it can actually be bothersome to them. And that's usually like the cats. However, the cats are very fragile. And this game doesn't have anything like WoW's avoidance system. If you never played WoW, pets in that game take 90% less damage from area of effect attacks. They still take full damage from direct attacks, but they're not going to get cleaved down with the enemy not trying to. But in our game, if you're a ranger in PvP, you're fighting a dragon hunter, he throws a trap down, you dodge it, your pet just gone immediately. Like Dragon Hunter, Willbender, Luminaries, good Elementalists, any of them will kill any pets in the zip code without even trying to. So reducing the cooldown on respawning the pet, I think this is going to be almost unnoticeable in PvE, but I think this would be a good change in PvP, and it will also let you experiment with more of the fragile pets that you would historically never want to use in PvP because they would just die so fast.
Boons when you disable a foe. The Fury on disable is pretty strong and has great synergy with Remorseless and the marksmanship line. Creating, when you see someone, you're going to get Fury, which gives you that opening strike proc again. So that's a pretty good synergy that we want to make sure it stays there. But now that's not buffing your great, so we're going to add a bit of might on it. So it's going to be even stronger in that regard. Natural Healing is moving to the Adept tier to make room for another Master tier trait. And Potent Ally is being deleted. Honed Axes was the Grand Master trait. It is being moved to the Master tier because similar to what we've been talking about, it wasn't really interesting for a Grandmaster trait. All it did was reduce your axe cooldowns and give you some damage. We felt like reducing axe cooldowns and whatnot was appropriate for this compared to the Greatsword trait because axe wasn't as needed to have these bonuses to be functional. But as it is moving down, we are nerfing it a little bit. This function that when you were merged as a soul beast, it double applied the base ferocity. This isn't really something that similar traits do, so we feel warranted in deleting it so that we could put a new Grandmaster trait that adds that damage back. As we talked about in Firearms before, the goal is to make these damage bonuses a bit more interesting, but not add damage on top of what you already have. Then we get to Resounding Timbre. This was the one that gave you swiftness and regeneration when you use the command.
Timbre.
It's going to be reworked to now when you use a command, you copy boons from yourself to your pets, and when you're a merged soul beast, it'll slightly extend the duration of boons on yourself instead. A problem Beast Mastery had was that, as with most things in PvE, having boons means you do more damage, so Beast Mastery wasn't even a better line than, say, Nature Magic, just because it copied boons to your pets. We wanted a more active way to play with it, and we felt like this was a good trigger. So when you use your heal, when you press Sikkim, Strength of the Pack, all your boons are going to be copied to your pet. So it's a way that you can upkeep boons on your pet while also having some of that management and feeling like you're interacting with them. And
I will say, and I've mentioned this before a few times over the years, there are a lot of ranger traits that proc when you pet swap. And I feel that is in direct conflict with the balance logic that he just said. So what he just said was, whenever you use a command skill, you'll copy your boons to your pet. Cool. But all the other traits are encouraging me to pet swap constantly. And every time you pet swap, you take the pet with all the boons and you toss it out, and then you bring in a new pet with no boons. So it's like every 12 seconds, 15 seconds, assuming your pet's not dead, you basically purge all boons off your pet. So unless they make it to where when you pet swap, boons that were on your old pet are moved to the new one, it is very much feels like there are two balanced decisions here that are at odds with one another. You've got all the many traits that encourage you to pet swap as often as freaking possible. And then you have all the many traits that are copying boons to your pet. So what happens is like you pet swap, you get a new pet in, it's got no boons, you start getting boons on it, it's ramping up, and then you just dump it again and get the other one back out. And you just keep doing that like over and over and over. So I would love to see some kind of little change that, and it would just be a ranger thing because no one else has pet swap. Like Mechanist has a pet, but it doesn't have a pet swap. I would love to see some kind of trait or default thing where if you swap pets, the boons are copied over to the new one if they're going to have all these traits that encourage swapping like as often as possible.
Then we're going to have Go for the Throat. This is a new Grandmaster trait replacing Honed Axes. When you strike an enemy with a B skill, so your pet F2, you're going to cast Lesser Sikkim on them. So this is going to give a small damage increase to your pet. Lesser Sikkim is going to be about 25% for the pet. Soul Beast will be even lower, kind of how normal Sikkim is. There's not going to be a reveal, but this is a way to, again, be a more interactive damage bonus and try and get damage out of your pet from this trait line. And of course, Lesser Sikkim is a command, so it'll proc Resounding Timber. So you get a lot more of those boon copying. So you can stay on top of things and actually have those interactions that feel like you're playing with your pet to get them to do more damage. And lastly, we are reducing the cooldown of pet swapping a defeated pet from 60 seconds to 35 seconds in PvE and PvP. This was a change we did in World v World a couple patches ago, and we felt like a similar change was warranted in the other game modes. For today's ecosystem and pets, they die very easily, and we wanted to make sure that pets were still killable, but maybe the punishment was just a bit too harsh. So toning that down a bit, not as far as we did in World v World, but we'll see how that goes.
All right. You mentioned at the beginning of the slide that mostly Beast Mastery taken on Soul Beast. It's very strong there, but not so much on the other specs. So is this kind of just aimed to make Beast Mastery, an attractive option, just kind of for general gameplay on other specs, or is there a specific role or sort of build type that you're keeping in mind or that you're thinking about when you're going through these changes?
Yeah, we think Beast Mastery has fallen just a bit behind in almost all game modes. So seeing it pick back up in PvP would be nice. In PvE, seeing it be used on something like a potential option for an Untamed build. Untamed already buffs your pet a bit, so having that synergy there to make this in a more appealing damage trait line than some of the others would definitely be interesting and kind of the goal of these changes.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. All right. Next up.
I will say, I expressed great frustration when he said that thing about Soul Beast, and I do not rescind that. I do not take that back. And some of these other things I think are kind of weird. However, overall, I like this page. Like if I just take this page as a whole, I like it. The reason I rolled Ranger all those years ago was I like pet builds. And I think it's cool that in this game, if you play a druid, you can be like a healer and have a pet build at the same time. Stuff like that. You can't do that in many MMOs. I like that. It's the reason I don't play Soul Beast much, because you merge with your pet and then it's like, oh hey, I don't have a pet anymore, I'm just a green warrior. I like having the pet. So them spending some time paying attention to the Beast Mastery trait line overall makes me happy. I look forward to trying this out. I disagree. I would love to sit down and have a conversation with them about some of the logic that they're saying and be like, okay, yes, you say this and you change this, but what about this? This directly conflicts with that. Can we address this too? I would love to talk with them for 5 minutes about this, or 5 hours. But overall, this leaves me looking forward to this. I at the end of this slide, I'm looking forward to trying out these changes. I mentioned earlier on that I did a lot of PvP over my last week of game time, and most of the time I was PvPing, I had Beast Mastery as one of my 3 trait lines just because I like it. So seeing that it's going to get some boosts, I look forward to trying it out, honestly.
Up is not Revenant, believe it or not, because some of us, not me, don't know how the alphabet works, but Thief is going to be next. And
Taylor just wanted to talk about Revenant, so we shuffled the order around.
It is his favorite
We
spec.
want to have 2 segments, 2 professions in a row to talk about by the same person.
Yeah, but here we go.
So we are talking about Thief here. I will be covering the Thief notes. Taylor will cover the Revenant, and then I'll bring it home with Warrior. First note here.
Ruined the whole stream. No
Yeah,
suspense.
spoiler. Warrior is coming sometime in these patch notes. Yeah, first note here, I guess the preamble. Kind of the main focus for this update is really fleshing out some of the Antiquary support build. We've seen a lot of success with the Antiquary DPS build, the trait that gives you a bunch of artifact triggers for spending initiative. Very fun, very powerful, but the support build is maybe not quite where we want it to be, so we'll see a lot of notes here that are intended to really help that. But first off, the kind of keynote at the top here is that artifacts will now always use the same weapon strength. This is something that we've been fixing up on a few. Essentially, most profession mechanics have this problem where if they are not explicitly told to, they will use the weapon strength of whatever weapon you have equipped. So if you have, say, a rifle equipped, that will result in more damage than if you have a sword equipped, because that is how weapon strength works in our game, that weapons have different strengths. Two-handed weapons are generally higher. Rifle, of course, is even higher than the other two-handeds because, rifles just have the highest weapon strength. But we don't really like that behavior where the damage of the profession skill is inconsistent based off what weapon you have equipped. We want to make sure that those skills deal the amount of damage that we kind of intend to and the number that we balance them to use. So this is just fixing that up. People have seen this note on some skills in the past as well, and they might see some same note on some skills in the future if there are still some that we've missed. We'll actually see this note as we get into the Revenant section as well. But the general goal for profession skills that are not tied to a weapon is that they will always use the same weapon strength. So that is a very long-winded way of explaining what the first patch note is saying.
We're past the first note. All right.
Oh, I need to take a water break.
Yeah.
But we do see some radius increases here on some of the artifacts. Exalted Hammer, Chalk Shield, these are getting some extra supportive tools. Like I said, we're really trying to flesh out that support Antiquary build. So Exalted Hammer going to be granting protection to nearby allies. Chalk Shield going to be giving barrier to nearby allies. The Hollow Dancer Decoy as well will be giving some boons here. Pulsing Might, and then giving Might and Fury on the explosion. Zephyrite Sun Crystal, this one is no longer going to be a stun break. I think we were a little bit unhappy with the kind of the level of variance that having a stun break on one of the artifacts introduced. But it will now blind enemies that it strikes and also remove conditions from nearby allies.
Very thematic.
Yes. And then here we see at the end kind of two updates, two traits to, again, flesh out that support build. We see Enterprising Aristocrat. This is going to be gaining the barrier when you use an artifact skill. Also going to be having reduced strike and condition damage while you have barrier and you have this trait equipped. And the kind of fun addition to this build is that Possessive Hoarder is going to be sharing the now barrier that's attached to Enterprising Aristocrat instead, and the barrier that's also attached to Magpie's Defense, so the one that when you heal or use your elite skill, that barrier will be shared with your allies when you have this trait equipped. So it does kind of get an extra level of barrier support coming out from the Antiquary, in addition to sharing boons and getting a few extra boons here on the artifacts, and a little bit of all those extra defensive components. And these kind of traits that are at the bottom are really intended to solidify that support Antiquary build.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, Cal, for taking Thief. And now moving on to the Lost Profession.
Oh, that's it. Okay, so all the Thief patch notes is basically Antiquary support tweaks. All right.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, Cal, for taking Thief. And now moving on to the Lost Profession. Revenant, take it away.
Yep. This slide, these are all Underwater Trident skills. Trident has a mechanic where it inflicts or does different things based on your equip legend.
I'm actually blown away that Underwater Trident anything got a whole slide. Right after they nerfed my Underwater Spear by 20%. Muck you, Taylor.
Ones are now updated to inflict slow and ethereal combos.
All right.
So we can go
very easy, very straightforward.
Yep. And the first change for release potential is the same thing Cal was talking about. Now damage will be consistent, no matter if you have a great sword or a sword on. So yay. Now we get into trait changes.
You want to spend 10 minutes talking about that note?
I feel like Cal did a great job explaining it.
Thanks.
Now, these are trying to kind of bolster up support Conduit, as we talked about Antiquary. Ventari is a core legend, so we want Ventari Conduit to potentially be something playable. Definitely don't want it to be forgotten. So, Boundless Knowledge, this was a trait that gave you boons to yourself when you reached the Affinity Threshold. It's now being reworked. It's going to grant boons to allies when you use a Legendary Entity Stance, the Raza skills, to create more of a good synergy between Raza and Ventari when you have this trait equipped. Perpetual Wisdom, this was the trait that had your F3 be an upkeep skill. Is this getting completely reworked? It's no longer going to cause Cosmic Wisdom to activate indefinitely and be that upkeep skill. It's basically going to cause you to grant boons to nearby allies when Numinous Gift procs. It's going to keep the functionality where Numinous Gift will proc on Legend Swap. So this trait essentially says when you Legend Swap or use your F3, you're going to give boons to your nearby allies that'll enhance that support opportunity. Twin Moon Sweep, getting some small changes when Centaur Stance is equipped. It's going to remove conditions from allies around you in the fragment instead of just yourself. This is so you can use that Twin Moon Sweep at range, and where the Raza image is, you'll also support allies over there instead of just around yourself. And then some small tweaks. Numinous Gift to the Grandmaster Minor. It's getting its boon swapped around. Instead of Quickness on Shiro and Fury on Raza, it's going to be swapped. So it's going to be Fury on Shiro and Quickness on Raza. Then lastly, a small change to Beguiling Haze, making it just a bit easier to land.
All right, very cool. Were we kind of feeling like support conduit was maybe not where you wanted it to be, or are these kind of quality of life changes, or obviously a couple different sort of parts to this update?
Yeah, we felt like Raza itself doesn't have the tools to, branch into that support role. We feel like Vintari and even Jalis are pretty good for support as a baseline, but the secondary legend, you really want to have some additional tools for that to cover the gaps you might have, so this will do.
Does Raza doesn't provide quickness or alacrity, does it? Because, like, when he's talking about support conduit, is he talking about, like, PvP? Because I don't think it supplies the boons needed for PvE support. Not currently, no. Okay, I was just making sure I remembered this correctly.
Do a better job in that.
Because when I was doing the I tried stuff for the VOE supports, I skipped conduit because I thought it didn't provide the essential boons.
Awesome, thank you.
Second to last thing. Quickness during all games. The boon granted by equipping legendary entity stance has been changed from Fury to Quickness. Okay, so it will become a Quickness support in January.
All right, and finally, we have made it to the Warrior slide, which we're very excited about. At least one of us is, certainly. And yeah, Cal, please.
I'm excited.
Cal is very excited, of course. CMC, as he's known.
I don't know if that's my warrior. Anyway, so starting off, we'll start off with Blade Trail. This is kind of the worst skill on the Greatsword kit. A little bit dated. You throw a projectile that cripples your enemy. As long as Rush is hitting, Rush is a good skill. Whirlwind, obviously a great skill. 100 Blades, pretty good skill, assuming you lock down your enemy, get that channel off. But Blade Trail, this is something that we felt could use a little bit of kind of a mini rework here. You're still going to be throwing out a Greatsword to strike your enemies. It's now just going to...
Oh, no. Okay, I don't know what Defiant Roar was, but Bullet Catcher was a really fun skill. And I see this, and I'm in mourning already. I'm sad. I'm sad at this part right now.
Immobilize them instead of crippling. So this will be a very short duration immobilize. I believe it's just 1 second on each hit. So you can kind of get that double tap, assuming that the range is correct. It's going to cast a little bit faster. Again, a little bit of after cast cleanup. Projectile is going to be much faster. Forget the exact number, but you've probably seen how slow the Blade Trail moves, and now it will move just a bit faster. Pretty powerful. Now you can throw Blade Trail, set up Rush. You can throw Blade Trail, set up Arcing Slice. Maybe obviously won't set up a full 100 blades, but it will really open the door for a bit more.
It will move on the way back, though. Well, that's right.
It will mobilize both outgoing and returning. So, pretty strong skill. Next, we have kind of a hot topic. These are some staff adjustments. We've seen a lot of difficulty, I guess, balancing Warrior around the existence of staff. We've seen just so much power in this kit of the staff weapon that's mostly intended to be a...
Okay, I have been saying ever since Secrets of the Obscure, when they added the expanded weapon proficiencies and everybody got a new weapon, I've been saying since Soto that Warrior won. The staff is definitely, in my opinion, the best kit that was added to the game from that line of weapons. The weakest part of it is the Warrior. Like, the Warrior sucks, and the staff is carrying it. Some guy just got a new motorcycle. It is very fun. However, in PvE, it's just a really good healing weapon. I don't know of any builds that are like the Ritualist right now can do like 10 to 15k DPS while healing a party. A Warrior's not doing that with the staff. It's just a really good healing weapon in PvE. But in PvP, it's a problem. It makes them like almost unkillable until they decide to weapon swap and kill you in 1 second. It's a lot more problematic in PvP and stuff like that. All right, I need to hear the rest of what they're saying. I want to hear. I'm hoping they tell us their logic for those.
Support weapon, so we obviously have a good amount of healing. We have that high mobility because we want it to be that front line, move your allies and be able to support them. Those are thematically things that make sense on this weapon. Bullet Catcher being a channeled block has been a little bit problematic, especially in PvP, I would say, but overall it is just a significant, probably a significantly more powerful effect of a hard defensive cooldown that we want on this weapon that's intended to be a little bit more of a support-focused weapon. And we've nerfed a lot of Warrior defensive mechanics, working essentially balancing around staff, but we'd rather see staff as an option rather than a mandatory pick, especially in PvP. And it's still going to get a support weapon. but we don't like having that block, and we decided just to rip it out. You know, Defiant Roar will still be there. It's not going to scale off number of blocks anymore. It's going to land somewhere in the middle, somewhere around, as if you block 2 attacks will just be the baseline functionality. Still going to give that adrenaline, still going to do that healing, be that big.
So Bullet Catcher, really quick, what it did is you would twirl the staff in front of you, and you would be blocking for a couple seconds. And then whatever damage you took, or would have taken, whatever damage you blocked was calculated, and when you hit the button a second time, you did the roar, do the roar, and it would do a big heal explosion around you, which it was increased based on the block. It was really fun on things like, let's say you're doing Bone Skinner with a pug, Bone Skinner leaps in the air, you start twirling the staff, he crashes down, you block the whole thing, you take 0 damage, even though you didn't dodge, and then you release the explosion and heal all the people that failed to dodge. Unless they went downstate, but you know, it was basically, it was a really cool mechanic, similar to the Greatsword on Revenant. It had one of those really fun mechanics where I'm blocking, if you hit me, I'm going to punish you. And then, you know, the thing hit you, and then you punish them. And it was very satisfying. It was quite fun. Now, it sounds like they're just taking the block out of it, which, in my opinion, is removing a fun thing. And if it's because of PvP, I once again want to go back to what I said about Chrono earlier. If this is causing problem in one game mode, and you have already added the ability to balance things on a per game mode basis to this game, why are we nerfing it across the entire game? Like, if, I don't remember how long its channeled block is, but if its channeled block is like 2 or 3 seconds in PvP, make it 1 second. Make it be a 1 second block followed by the roar or something like that. Like just tweak it in PvP and leave it alone in the game modes where it's fine. I'm sad to see it. I'm sad to see it. Like, it is a powerful weapon, but it's also very fun. And in PvE, it's not overpowered. Okay.
Kind of big healing moment. But we wanted to shift the identity a little bit further toward the support role and have less of that raw defensive strength that it currently has. Similarly, we see no more Aegis in competitive modes. We feel that's really important for PvE, as a lot of our support builds do have access to that, key moment of Aegis application, but it's just another instance of something that is a bit too powerful and competitive, and it's just something that we just don't want to see on this weapon anymore. So
I could... I'm not a warrior main in PvP. I don't have a horse in this race. Line Breaker, it's a movement skill. You choose an area, you charge toward that area. At the end of the charge, you do a healing explosion, and then apply Aegis, and then I think another buff that makes your attacks unblockable for a couple seconds. So Line Breaker did have a pretty stacked kit. It was a movement skill, it was a heal skill, it was an Aegis, it was on like 5 people Aegis, it was that other buff. So this one makes a little more sense to me. It's like, okay, in this game mode, it's too stacked, it's doing too much. We removed one thing, and they're not doing it in PvE also. So, okay, sure, cool. You're making a change in the game modes where it's a problem. So, it also does protection. Okay, so Aegis protection and 3 unblockable attacks for 5 allies and a heal and a movement skill. Yeah, there's like nothing in the game that does that much stuff. Shift Signet. So I'm okay with this change because they are doing to this what I'm asking them to do here, which is just tweak it in the modes where you have a problem with it, not everywhere.
You're still gonna have the high mobility. You have the leap on 2, the dash on 3, but a little bit less of that hard defense attached to the weapon. And we'll see a few defensive updates on future slides. We see balance stance here, getting the cooldown reduction back to what it used to be. We'd rather see kind of a wider range of options available to warriors and have them feel less attached to staff, and have us balancing essentially all their other mechanics around the existence of staff.
All right.
It's going to have that strong healing power that's a little bit easier to balance than something like a hard defensive channel block, which could end up getting the Nightfall treatment in Worldly World, where the cooldown just becomes so high that it's just unfun to use on top of how strong it is. So we felt that the right move here was just to remove the block. You obviously still have the CC. This weapon's still incredibly powerful. We're not too worried about the overall strength of the staff kit, and we felt that the block on top was just a little bit too much. So I'm hoping that Roy is not going to leak the next change like he did during our rehearsal. But have you seen the change that has
rehearsal?
Spicy change?
Wait, they do rehearsal. I'm sorry, this is so mean to say. I'm just surprised to hear that they actually do a rehearsal with the fact that they have so many audio issues every time they do these. I love them to bits, but I'm surprised to hear they do rehearsals with the audio issues they have every single stream.
Change in the last decade, according to Taylor.
Okay, I'm guessing when he says they do rehearsal that they are just like talking to each other and they're not actually checking the recording.
No, we haven't showed it yet. I thought you wanted to tell a story first.
Yeah, no, you haven't seen it yet because it's the next change that we'll talk about that Roy should not reveal yet because it is
Yeah.
currently story time.
I know what I'm doing. Don't worry.
We're going to tell a story about a trait that existed a long time
Rock
ago.
viewers, skip ahead 5 minutes.
Yeah, probably about 5 minutes. Some of you have been playing the game a long time, may be familiar with the name Illusionary Persona. This is a trait
We're
that
adding Illusionary
used to
Persona to
exist.
Warrior.
Yes, perfect. This is a trait that used to exist in the Illusions trait line. It was kind of the iconic Grandmaster trait of the Mesmer profession, and what it said is that you yourself count toward your shatters. So this obviously allowed you to cast Distortion without any clones up, because you would count for a clone. You could cast Diversion with no clones up, because you would count as a clone. Slightly less relevant for Mind Wreck and Cryo Frustration, but it was still that kind of extra addition on top. And what happened with this trait was that it was just so fundamental to how the Mesmer profession played, especially in competitive modes, because you needed that distort availability, you needed that diversion availability, that every Mesmer...
Oh, now I get what he's getting at here. So going forward, Warrior is going to count for their own rage.
build started with the Illusion trait line.
That doesn't
The
make any
Illusion trait
sense.
line because you needed Illusionary Persona. And the other traits in that trait line were fine. You know, they're good, but the main reason you're there is because you need Illusionary Persona to actually play your profession in a way that feels cohesive and it feels good and it feels fun.
I like how he just explained you needed this for your profession to feel fun. Right after he's like, yeah, so this used to exist before we got rid of it. Yeah, Mesmers needed this for their class to feel fun. Yeah, we deleted it.
And that trait doesn't exist anymore because a long time ago it got rolled in as baseline functionality to the profession.
Oh, good job.
And none of us were actually on the team at the time. You know, this long predates any of us even working at ArenaNet. But I can almost guarantee that the thinking at the time was that we don't want this reliance so heavily on a single trait line for a single trait that just makes the profession play the way that we want to, you know, as developers. This is just how Mesmer should work.
I feel that way about Lingering Light and Druid.
And so that got rolled in baseline, and you know that's a pretty big power spike for Mesmer at the time because then you are no longer tied to the Illusions trait line. You can feel free to still play Illusions because there's still good traits there, but now you have so much more flexibility in how you build your profession. I think a lot of people may have figured out where I'm going with this because we are on the Warrior slide.
I still don't know what we're doing.
Okay. So they're taking a trait in Warrior and they're going to make it baseline. Oh man, if Captain Crapface here, I bet he would have some really good guesses for me. I'm unspoiled right now, so I'm wondering what Warrior trait they are baking into the kit.
Go ahead, press the button, Roy. We can see that.
Fast Hands. This trait now grants swiftness when swapping weapons in combat, instead of reducing weapon swap cooldown. Oh, good God! Are they baking the 5-second weapon swap in baseline?
Warrior profession will now always have a 5-second weapon swap cooldown.
Holy crap! That's amazing! Show me the live Twitch react.
This is obviously a trait that exists in the discipline trait line called Fast Hands right now. It's going to do something slightly different. Now it's just going to give you swiftness when you swap weapons in combat, but you will no longer have to take discipline trait line to play.
5 seconds? Yeah, Warrior, if for anyone who's not a Warrior main... Damn it, Nog, shut up. For anyone who's not a Warrior, they have a trait that it will reduce their weapon swap cooldown to 5 seconds. So they can weapon swap very, very rapidly. And they are changing what that trait does and giving it to everybody.
Hands, because similarly to Illusionary Persona, this is a trait that's just so fundamental to how Warriors play that we felt it is something that should be just core functionality of the profession. And the discipline trait line is still incredibly strong. You know, you still have burst mastery there, you still have burst cooldown reduction, Warrior sprint, Brawler's recovery. Like, these are all traits that you still will consider. You still might want them for your Warrior builds, but you are no longer completely tied to this trait line. Maybe you want to play strength defense with an elite specialization, and now you feel that you can because you will still have that reduced weapon swap cooldown. That is pretty iconic for Warrior at this point. And it's similar to what I mentioned with Illusionary Persona. Like, this is probably a notable power spike for Warrior. And we're gonna
now, I want to point something out here. Most sigils that are like on weapon swap, file your taxes or whatever, most of those have a 10-second internal cooldown. So if you're immediately thinking, oh, I'm just going to load up on weapon swap sigils, they're only going to proc every other weapon swap if you're weapon swapping as fast as possible with this new thing. They can still be worth using, but it's worth knowing that and understanding what you're doing.
A really close eye on it, and there might be other things that need to be brought down as a result. But this is the direction that we felt is correct for Warrior as a profession, and so this is...
Isn't it 9? Something like that, but it's more than 5. Still mad about Bullet Catcher, though.
But I forgot. Taylor, do you have anything to add about Fast Hands before we move on?
I think just general note is that Fast Hands is not the only example of a type of trade like this that we've talked about. And in the future, we will be reevaluating some other things in other classes. I think when we touched Guardian, putting the stun breaks on those F3s, that was a smaller example of this. So, you know, it's in our mind of there are examples of this in the game where traits are just so build defining that they're, you know, needed.
Yep, that's good. Good call out. We do still have some other changes for Warrior.
Yeah. Also, I don't know if you want to mention that obviously Fast Hands no longer being a trait is going to be replaced. As a minor trait. Or there's a new functionality for it, I should say.
It now grants you swiftness when you swap weapons, which, you know, obviously does play into the Warrior Sprint, which gives you bonus damage while you have swiftness and just a little bit more mobility if you choose not to play with Warrior Sprint.
Yeah. Notably, it's still called Fast Hands and not Fast Feet.
It is not called Fast Feet, that's correct.
Fast Hands grants swiftness to feet.
Finally, we can move on to the slide and go to the next one.
Oh god, okay, hang on. Berserker Savage Instinct increased duration by 1/4 second in PvP. Dead or Alive increased base healing by 480. Eternal Champion increased stability duration from 2 to 3 seconds in PvP. Spellbreaker Featherfoot Grace now also grants protection. Slow Counter, this trait has been reworked and named Resilient Counter. Full Counter grants resistance. Revenge Counter, this trait has been reworked and named Resolute Counter. Full Counter heals and removes conditions from you. To this day, if I'm like picking my, let's say I'm fighting a warrior, and they're like, yeah, pick your opponent, I'm never picking Spellbreaker. The good Spellbreakers make me feel like I'm getting punched right in the Windows System 32 files. Like, I can't even do anything. It's like, I'm CC'd, they're full countering, and then, you know, when they do the full counter, they daze you. So this is like, they daze you, they heal themselves, they hit you, and they remove conditions from themselves. Like, oh my god. Dude. And it's got such a short cooldown, too. Oh my god, this is going to be the bane of my existence in PvP. I'm already calling it.
We have a few updates to elite specializations. These are all defensive focused. This is kind of coming back to what felt like an eternity ago where we were
just don't hit them.
And
I play a ranger. Ranger has a pet. Usually when they do the animation, the pet's already triggered it. It's like instantaneous. Additionally, if you've got a trap on the ground or if you have like a barrage going, like it triggers like instantaneously. Another thing is the full counter. I saw this just day before yesterday. Is it still has a bug that happens sometimes even after like close to 10 years. And some of you have seen it. And you ever seen a warrior in PvP and they're running around and they appear to be full countering 100% of the time? Like they've got the shards floating around them the whole match. Like, that needs to be fixed. I saw that just day before yesterday when I was PvPing and I was fighting a warrior and he was just spell breaking the whole game. And so it was more difficult to tell when he was full countering because I had to look at his buff bar instead of just looking at his character. And it was almost, you know, I could almost never spot it in time because whenever I spot it, I have to stop my attack and stop the pet attack. And it's just more problematic.
How it's supposed to exist alongside warrior defensive options. And so with the removal of that block, we were able to revisit a lot of defensive options for especially Berserker and Spellbreaker. We see Savage Instinct getting just a slight addition to that damage reduction. Quarter second, obviously gets another extra quarter second if you have Eternal Champion equipped. Dead or Alive similarly getting a healing bump. Eternal Champion getting that stability duration increased just a little bit again. We feel a little bit more comfortable doing these changes with the adjustments that we made to staff. And similarly, we see Spellbreaker. Featherfoot Grace can give you some protection on top of what it already does. Slow counter, not the most fun mechanic to slow and cripple enemies with your full counter. So now it's going to get the resistance component of Revenge counter is just going to be on that master tier trait now. And then Revenge counter getting a bit of a rework here to be more of that defensive focused Grandmaster trait. This is going to be called Resolute counter, and it's going to heal you and remove conditions from you when you trigger full counter.
All right, great. And I believe that will wrap things up, actually, for our profession slides. Unless there's anything else that I'm forgetting, but I don't believe I am.
I don't believe so.
No. So yeah, that's going to be it for the profession updates. As always, we didn't mention this at the beginning of the stream, but as always, the notes will be posted to the forums once the stream ends, just in a few minutes. I did mention as well, we plan to upload the VOD of this stream to YouTube. So if you're watching on YouTube, hello and welcome.
Hello.
To the end of the VOD. Yes, thank you very much for tuning in as always. And as always, make sure you send us your feedback on the forums, on Reddit, anywhere else. And we will be keeping an eye out for that feedback. And yeah, anything else you guys would like to mention?
Yeah, so I'll just reiterate. I said this at the start of the stream, but that was a long time ago, so I'll say it again. This update was kind of finalized early last week before the update that went out on Tuesday even shipped. So we're still keeping an eye on the results of that patch.
Wait.
And there might be some additional.
Wait. That was important.
Early last week before
To mention.
Yeah, so I'll just reiterate. I said this at the start of the stream, but that was a long time ago, so I'll say it again. This update was kind of finalized early last week before the update that went out on Tuesday even shipped. So we're still keeping an eye on the results of that patch, and there might be some additional adjustments made, on the especially for the tuning of elite specs that maybe didn't quite land where we wanted them to as a result of that patch. But we are still kind of gathering the feedback from that patch, and we have a little bit of time to get some additional follow-ups to that patch in for January. Those will obviously not be previewed here because, like I said, the notes were finalized before the patch was even live, and none of us here are psychics, unfortunately.
Not yet. Well, all right, very cool. Taylor, any last words?
I think I just wanted to reiterate our thoughts on the bullet catcher change because I think it is a pretty big shift. Staff have a lot of defensive tools in it. It had sustain, the active blocks, and mobility, and it kind of forced us to lower things around staff. We nerfed balance stance. We've been nerfing other warrior defensives for a while, all because staff exists and had these kind of soft power in it. And we felt like it became that if you didn't put a staff on your warrior build, you really felt it. And the adjustment here is we have to bring staff down, which on paper, it looks like, wow, we're nerfing warrior even more because that is nerfing their main defensive. But the goal here is that by making staff weaker, we can bring up all the other tools and make it so a warrior as a whole is in a better position without having to rely on the staff weapon.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and I think I can add a little extra there too. We were kind of thinking about some other adjustments that we could make for warrior around like the adjustments to staff. But as soon as we decided we wanted to change fast hands and make the weapons.
The main problem with what Taylor just said, in my opinion, is these patch notes did not include buffs to other defensives. Like, he said, by bringing down the staff, we can bring up a whole bunch of other stuff related to warrior. Hold on, let me fact check myself right now. Give me just a second. He said, by bringing down staff, we can bring up other stuff related to warrior. And they've got a few minor defensive stuff with Berserker, and a couple of things with full counter. I guess the balance stance getting its cooldown reduced by 10 seconds is part of what they're talking about. I don't know. Like, I guess if they're weighing Bullet Catcher against balance stance, Dead or Alive, and Eternal Champion, and slow counter and revenge counter, but that's only 2 of the 4 elite specs. But I definitely don't think that's like a 1-to-1 trade. Okay. All right, I guess, okay, what I was about to say was incorrect. I will end that thought there.
Cooldown baseline functionality, it started becoming like more of an started to become more of an unknown quantity, and it's like, okay, our build's going to start playing strength and defense, and like now your build is just inherently more tanky because you are getting access to like both of those trait lines, or maybe even like the strength tactics build that's like might so might focus, and you have mending might on top of might makes right, and like there's an interesting sustain option. So there's a lot of questions that are going to come out of the weapon swap recharge time being baseline, and we didn't want to make a ton of sweeping changes on top of that as well. But as always, we'll be keeping like a very close eye on what's going on with warrior as the result of this patch.
I just noticed the Ritlog plushie back here.
If staff needs to be a stronger weapon afterwards, that's totally a thing that can happen. It's not going to be getting a block back on it, but the healing numbers can increase. You know, the movement skill cooldowns can come down. There's so many knobs that we have access to on that kit because it's just so much functionality in it on top of that block that was already there that is no longer there. But we feel pretty confident that staff can still have a place in the warrior weapon ecosystem. And, you know, we obviously want that to still be the case. We just don't want it to be the weapon that every warrior build plays for similar reasons. You know, we don't want to have builds that are, or professions that are so tied to single build components. We want that build flexibility. We want those identities to exist on different weapons, so there are different flavors of builds that play different weapons or play different trait lines. And, you know, finding the right balance so that all those feel good and feel like real options it's kind of the point of balance updates. You know, we try to adjust things as we can every update such that the build diversity or the theory craft options are increased.
All right, very good. Thank you for those closing words, both of you. And yeah, that'll be it then for us today. Thank you again for tuning in and watching. And as always, make sure to go to the forums, send us your feedback, check out the patch notes if you like. And until next time, we will see you in the mists. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay. All right. That ends the segment where they, that ends the stream. So now what I'm going to do is, to the best of my ability, just spit out a TLDR for the people that skip all the way to the end of this video. So I'm going to put these patch notes on stream here, or on screen, I should say, and let's jump into this. So, the TLDR for each class. If you're watching at this point, you probably skipped to the end of the video. If you want the nitty-gritty details, go back and watch it. Why did you skip it? But if you just want a TLDR, here we go. Elementalist. They have made some assorted changes to a couple of different traits. Bountiful Power has been reworked, and whenever you change attunements, you get a charge. At 5 charges, you'll gain quickness and increase strike damage for a time. This is modeled after a trait from Engineer. This whole section here is, or I should say, sorry, hold on a sec. This whole section is modeled on Weaver Spear. All of Weaver Spear 3s are getting a buff the next strike in some way. So after every Weaver Spear 3, your next hit does bleh, just whatever it says there. And then we've got a few other tweaks right here that you can see right there. Catalyst has a trait that is being, Staunch Auras has been reworked to Elemental Synergy. You gain additional bonuses when finishing a combo based on current attunement. One trigger per attunement per interval. Fire gives you more might, water gives you an extra heal on yourself, air gives you more endurance, earth gives you more stability. So if you want to keep constantly giving yourself stability, you have to stay in earth. You can't just do it in any aura anymore, is my understanding. Engineer. Engineer update is focused on adjusting a number of underperforming traits. Firearms will see some major shifts to the introduction of 2 new damage-focused Grandmaster traits, and Alchemy will get some additional tools for supporting your allies. So, Engineer, toolkit buffs, rifle buffs, a whole lot of trait changes. Notable ones, Sharpshooter. This has been reworked and moved to the slot previously occupied by modified ammunition. Bleeding scales with power instead of Condi damage at a reduced rate. This is similar to Elementalist Inferno builds, where their burning scales with power instead of Condi damage. Other new Grandmaster trait is Heavy Metal. This slot was previously occupied by Equal and Opposite Reaction, which is still there, it's just getting moved. Your critical strike chance and damage increases when the target goes below 75%, and below 50%, and below 25%. So the lower they are, the more crit chance and crit damage you have. Guardian. They are getting baked-in stun breaks, which I am so happy about. So any default Guardian, their Virtue of Courage, and if you're Dragon Hunter, your Shield of Courage now has a stun break. Even if you have no stun breaks on your bar, or 0 specializations, or 0 traits, you already have a stun break. And then there's a couple of other minor trait changes. Okay. Mesmer. Moa's Signet is getting a big kick in the pants. In PvE, cooldown is getting reduced, but the Defiance damage is getting cut almost in half because Chrono with Continuum Split was too strong with it, which I say, that's stupid. Then only nerf it for Chrono. Why are the other 3 elite specs getting their Moa's Signet nerfed as well? That's my thoughts on the matter. I'm curious what yours are. But Moa's Signet is getting massive kick in the pants because Chrono with a Continuum Split was too strong with it. Phantasmal Sharpshooter, Mental Glass, so we've got some rifle tweaks right here. Chronomancer itself increased the cooldown of Well of Precog from 30 seconds to 60 in PvE. Devastating. And a few other changes here. Improved Alacrity says it's getting removed, but it's getting re-added right here. It's getting moved to another trait. New mechanic with Time Bomb. When you hit an enemy, you can put Time Bomb on them, and they take more damage from you until the bomb goes off, which then does big damage to them and around them. In PvE, in PvP, if you've got Time Bomb on you, you might want to move away from your allies so you don't hit them with it, and then dodge roll the explosion if possible. Well of Precognition, my understanding is if you've got improved Alacrity and you've got Continuum Split, you could get this back down to a 30-second cooldown, but it will require effort, which means the bad chronos are going to be worse after this, I believe, and the good chronos will still be fine. So we will see. Necromancer. Greatsword changes. They are redoing Death Spiral, no longer generates life force, instead it has life stealing. Nightfall will only now convert boons to conditions and blind enemies on the first tick. The other ticks will grant the Necromancer protection and life force if they are in the field. It'll still do ticking damage on everyone. Grasping Darkness, if you pull an enemy, as long as it hits them, whether they have stability or not, you'll get quickness. So their pull just got a little more deadly, because if you get pulled in, you got a quickness Reaper in your face. Well, I say Reaper because they usually use Greatsword, but I guess any Necro. And then there's a few trait changes here. Ranger. Ranger, they revealed that they have been balancing Beast Mastery for years based on Soul Beast. I have a lot of thoughts about that, none of which are PG. Beast Mastery has been in the game since launch, Soul Beast was added years later, and apparently Beast Mastery has been getting balanced based on Soul Beast performance ever since then, for some reason. So, they have decided to change that, and they are giving Beast Mastery a bunch of tweaks. Mostly buffs, but a few negative things as well. But a lot of the buffs will not affect Soul Beast. For example, if you are a Soul Beast and you are merged with your pet, you would gain the benefits from Beast Mastery. You still will, but you won't get these new super benefits because they're too much for you. Additionally, Greatsword is getting some small buffs in all game modes and reduced cooldowns, but the reduced cooldowns are because they're taking away two-hand training, which reduces the cooldown. However, two-handed training also reduces the cooldown of underwater spear skills, and they're not baking those into the kit, so muck that, I guess. Now, obviously, that's underwater spear, not a big deal, but as we go ahead, you'll see why that's kind of weird. Anyway, so there's a bunch of changes here for Greatsword and for Beast Mastery, and there is a new Grandmaster trait called Go for the Throat, where if you hit an enemy with a beast skill, it will cast a lesser version of Sick'em on that enemy, and reduces the cooldown of pet swapping a dead pet from 60 seconds to 35 in PvE and PvP. Revenant. Revenant is getting buffs to their underwater trident. Which, again, it's like, okay, they're paying attention to that, but Underwater Ranger Spear just got nerfed by 20% for some reason. Not a hill I'm going to die on, but I find it odd. Conduit will have quickness, it appears. Numinous GIF. The boon granted by equipping legendary entity stance has been changed from Fury to Quickness in all modes. So I believe we will start seeing quick heal and quick DPS conduits in PvE after January. Also, I think it is important to pause and say something that I forgot to say at the beginning. This update was finalized before they released the most recent patch that we got at the time of this recording. So that means there's nothing in here about stuff that is overperforming since the most recent balance patch. They said that based on our feedback, they will still add more things to this patch, but this is the stuff they already had prepared to show us. All right. Thief. The entire Thief section is basically they are fleshing out antiquary support. This whole thing is antiquary support stuff. Warrior. Staff adjustments. Linebreaker no longer grants Aegis in PvP and World v World. Totally fine. It was already a movement skill. It was already a heal skill. It gave protection to 5 people. It gave Aegis to 5 people. It made 5 people's attacks go unblockable. They found something. They're like, look, this is too stacked. This is problematic. We're removing this one thing. Fine. Bullet Catcher, because of how good it is in PvP and World v World, they are removing it from all game modes. Similar to my anger about the chrono thing, if it's a problem in one game mode, fix it in that game mode is my philosophy on that. I don't like that they're doing this in PvE. It was a very fun skill. I have said ever since Soto that Staff was the best weapon they made, and maybe it was too good, but it wasn't overpowered in PvE. It wasn't OP there. But they are removing Bullet Catcher and just leaving Defiant Roar, which was the thing that you would use after Bullet Catcher. So it'll still give you Adrenaline, it'll still do the big heal, but you no longer have the block. The block is going to be gone. Fast Hands. This is huge. Fast Hands was a trait that reduced your weapon swap cooldown from 10 seconds to 5. This is a warrior thing. They're making this baseline. All warriors from January onward, they are planning to have a 5-second weapon swap cooldown. The default is 10 for any new players. This is going to be a warrior thing, and you will not have to take a specialization for it. So this is really big, and this will open up a lot of new builds everywhere. Because a lot of people take that trait line. I mean, there are other good traits in there, but that is the main reason to take it, is for that 5-second cooldown. So this is a very good thing for warriors. This line right here is the fast hands thing is going to be baseline. Aside from that, there's a few other more minor things. They gave a few buffs to defensive things. They said that for a long time, the warrior staff is so good that they couldn't, they kept nerfing other warrior defensive things because the warrior staff was so good, but then it made the staff like mandatory to take. And I totally get that. I don't know if I think these other things that they're giving back are going to make up for the fact that they're removing the block from this weapon. But again, if it's problematic in PvP, okay, fine. I still don't like that they're removing it in PvE, because they do have the ability to change a mechanic of an ability in one game mode and not in others. If it were up to me, I'd say, okay, well, remove it in PvP if it's really that bad, but leave it in PvE because it's not a problem there. People are already used to it and it's fun. That's it. That is the TLDR. If you want the nitty-gritty details, go back through and read it. I'll have the notes pinned down below, or you can go to the specific section and watch that whole section if you fancy it. That is everything we know from today's live stream. And if you got any questions, problems, thoughts, concerns, or if you noticed anything I missed, put it in the comment section down below, and I'll fight you there.